Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we plunge into the icy grip of April 14th, 1912, a night so infamous, so profoundly tragic, that simply reading about it sends shivers down the spine. Imagine standing on the pier in Southampton, a crisp spring breeze whipping at your clothes, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and nervous excitement. The RMS Titanic, a veritable floating city, looms over you, her four colossal funnels reaching for the sky like aspirations made manifest. Her hull, a deep majestic black, gleams under the weak morning sun, promising passage across the vast, indifferent Atlantic. You wouldn't last 10 minutes, my friend, not with the delicate sensibilities we've cultivated in our cosy, climate-controlled lives. They probably won't survive this. The sheer scale of it all is overwhelming. The noise of the crowd, the final farewells, the frantic last-minute loading of provisions. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now tell me, where are you tuning in from, and what's the local time as we embark on this somber journey? Post it in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sheer audacity of the vessel, the unsinkable Titanic, was a marvel of Edwardian engineering and ambition. She wasn't just a ship, she was a declaration, a titan of industry and luxury designed to ferry the world's elite and the hopeful masses across the Atlantic with unprecedented speed and comfort. As the morning of April 10th, 1912, dawned, Southampton docks pulsed with an energy that was almost palpable. Thousands of onlookers had gathered, their necks craning, their breaths fogging in the cool air, all eager to witness the departure of what was then the largest ship ever built. Gangplanks hummed with activity, a constant stream of humanity flowing onto the gargantuan vessel. First-class passengers, often bedecked in their finest furs and hats, were ushered into the opulent embrace of the A-deck, their valets and maids scurrying behind them with mountains of designer luggage. One could almost hear the rustle of silk and the quiet clinking of champagne glasses even before the ship set sail. Down below, a different, equally compelling drama unfolded. Third-class passengers, many of them immigrants clutching their life savings and their dreams of a new world, shuffled aboard through separate entrances. Their luggage, often meagre bundles tied with string, spoke of their humble origins and the immense leap of faith they were taking. The air in their quarters was already thick with the scent of pine, coal, and the nervous anticipation of a journey that, for many, marked a definitive break from everything they had ever known. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the Titanic had to negotiate a near collision with the SS New York as she left Southampton. The suction created by the Titanic's massive propellers actually broke the mooring lines of the smaller vessel, pulling it dangerously close. A quick-thinking pilot prevented a disastrous collision before the maiden voyage even properly began, a bizarre precursor to the fateful events yet to come. It's almost as if the universe was offering a subtle yet firm premonition. The ship itself was a kaleidoscope of human experience, a microcosm of society afloat. From the multi-millionaire John Jacob Astor IV, whose fortune would make him a titan even by today's standards, to the determined Irish immigrants seeking a fresh start in America, everyone had a story, a reason for being on this particular ship, on this particular voyage. Astor, for instance, travelled with his pregnant second wife Madeline, who was 5 months younger than his own son. That must have made for some interesting family dinners, wouldn't you say? Perhaps Madeline brought her own crocodile dung sunscreen, a delightful beauty secret of the era, which probably smelled as charming as it sounds. You can imagine the hushed whispers among the other first-class ladies, a mixture of envy and scandal. The Titanic's design boasted unprecedented levels of safety, or so the White Star Line vehemently asserted. She featured 16 watertight compartments, a technological marvel that was supposed to ensure buoyancy, even if several compartments were breached. This wasn't merely marketing hype, it was genuinely considered state-of-the-art for its time. Historians still argue whether the classification society, Lloyd's Register, fully understood the implications of the design choices, particularly the height of the bulkheads, which didn't extend all the way to the top deck. This subtle oversight would later prove catastrophic, allowing water to spill over from one compartment to the next like a series of cascading dominoes. As the great ship slowly pulled away from the dock, the cheers of the crowd mingled with the mournful blast of her enormous whistle. a sound that must have resonated deep within the bones of everyone present. It was a sound of departure, of hope, and for many of no return. Passengers waved handkerchiefs, some with joy, others with tears in their eyes as the land receded into a distant blur. The churning propellers created a massive wake, a foamy path that stretched back to the vanishing shoreline, a symbolic severance from the old world. One can only imagine the collective sigh of relief and exhilaration as the open sea finally embraced them. The journey had truly begun. The initial days of the voyage were idyllic, almost dreamlike. The Atlantic, famously temperamental, offered an uncharacteristically calm passage, its surface shimmering under a gentle spring sun. Children romped on the decks, their laughter echoing against the grand promenades. Young lovers found secluded corners for whispered conversations, their hearts undoubtedly filled with the romance of the sea. For the first-class passengers, life was a continuous pageant of luxury. They dined on gourmet meals, prepared by a brigade of chefs in gleaming galleys. Oysters, foie gras, succulent roasts, and an array of delicate pastries were all on offer, paired with the finest wines from the ship's extensive cellar. The smoking room, adorned with dark wood panelling and leather armchairs, became a hub for gentlemen discussing business, politics, and the latest gossip, their cigars glowing like tiny beacons in the dimly lit space. Ladies, meanwhile, gathered in the opulent reading and writing room, penning letters on embossed stationery or simply enjoying the quiet elegance of their surroundings. The ship was a floating palace, a testament to human ingenuity and the boundless pursuit of comfort. Even the simple act of strolling on the promenade deck was an experience in itself. The air, crisp and invigorating, carried the scent of the sea, mingled with the faint aroma of fresh paint and polished brass. Imagine the feeling of the polished teak deck beneath your feet, the rhythmic thrum of the engines deep below, a constant reminder of the immense power propelling this behemoth across the ocean. Every detail, from the ornate light fixtures to the plush carpets, was designed to evoke a sense of grandeur and timeless elegance. For those who could afford it, the Titanic was not just transportation, it was an experience, a statement. A quirky tidbit is that the ship carried a surprising number of cars, including a French Renault owned by first-class passenger William Carter. Imagine packing your automobile for a transatlantic voyage, just in case you fancied a drive upon arrival in New York. It speaks volumes about the expectations of convenience for the ultra-wealthy of that era. The gymnasium offered a range of state-of-the-art equipment for those keen to maintain their fitness, including rowing machines, cycling machines, and even an electric horse. One could imagine a stout gentleman in tweed trying to master the mechanical horse, perhaps muttering under his breath about the lack of actual equine scent. Dash it all, a horse should smell like a horse, not polished metal and electricity, he might exclaim, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. The swimming pool, a luxurious indoor facility, provided a refreshing escape, while the Turkish baths offered a serene sanctuary for relaxation and rejuvenation. Each amenity was meticulously crafted to ensure the utmost comfort and diversion for the discerning traveller. The sense of invincibility, of being utterly removed from the ordinary struggles of the world, must have been intoxicating for these privileged few. The evening hours brought forth a different kind of magic. The dining saloons, particularly the magnificent first-class dining saloon on D-deck, transformed into glittering spectacles. Chandeliers cast a warm glow over starched white tablecloths, gleaming silverware and crystal glasses. Orchestras played classical music, their melodies drifting through the air, providing a sophisticated backdrop to the lively conversations. Men in their tailored tuxedos and women in their exquisite gowns created a dazzling tableau, a snapshot of high society in motion. It was a world of privilege and refinement, where every need was anticipated and every desire catered to. The sheer effort involved in preparing and serving such elaborate meals for hundreds of passengers, all while at sea, was a monumental undertaking, a testament to the dedication of the ship's vast culinary and service staff. It was a fleeting golden age, a last hurrah for an era of unbridled optimism and seemingly limitless progress. Little did anyone aboard know, of course, that this opulent bubble was already speeding towards its inevitable icy demise. While the upper crust revelled in their gilded cages, the second-class passengers on the Titanic enjoyed a level of comfort that would have been considered first class on almost any other contemporary liner. Their accommodations, though not as ostentatious as those on a deck, were still remarkably well appointed and spacious. Imagine stepping into a cabin with polished mahogany panelling, comfortable berths, and perhaps even a private wash basin. It certainly wasn't the Ritz, but it was far from cramped or utilitarian. These were often professionals, prosperous merchants, academics, or families on vacation, people who had worked hard to achieve a comfortable standing in society and now expected a certain standard of living, even at sea. Their dining saloon, located on D-deck, was still a grand affair, though perhaps lacking the sheer acreage and intricate detailing of its first-class counterpart. Here, tables were also adorned with crisp white linen, and the menu, while slightly less extensive, still offered a delicious array of dishes. They might not have had oysters on the half-shell for every meal, but they certainly enjoyed hearty, well-prepared fare. Think roast beef with all the trimmings, fresh fish, and a variety of seasonal vegetables. The atmosphere was convivial, a lively hum of conversation as passengers from diverse backgrounds shared stories and anticipated their arrival in the new world. It was a place where connections were forged, where business deals might have been subtly hinted at, and where children, perhaps a little more boisterous than their first-class counterparts, giggled over their dessert. The second-class promenade deck, while not as expansive as the first-class version, still offered ample space for fresh air and stunning ocean views. Here, passengers could stroll arm in arm, admiring the vast expanse of the Atlantic, perhaps discussing the day's events, or simply enjoying the tranquil rhythm of the waves. It was a world away from the crowded, bustling steerage, yet still distinct from the exclusive enclaves of the millionaires above. This middle ground was crucial. It allowed a sense of shared experience, a microcosm of the aspirations of the rising middle class. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the second-class library was a surprisingly well-stocked room, offering a quiet retreat for those who preferred a good book to lively conversation. It wasn't a sprawling, multi-room affair, but it was cosy and inviting, providing a touch of intellectual solace amidst the journey. One could easily picture a well-dressed gentleman, perhaps a professor, poring over a volume of poetry, occasionally glancing up to admire the ceaseless horizon. The social spaces for second-class passengers included a smoking room, similar in function to the first-class version, but with a slightly less elaborate decor, and a general room where ladies might gather for afternoon tea or to play card games. There was a sense of decorum, but also a relaxed atmosphere, a feeling of being among peers. One could imagine a group of women discussing the latest fashion trends, perhaps comparing notes on their travel plans, or simply sharing anecdotes about their lives. A gentleman might be heard grumbling good-naturedly about the card game, perhaps jokingly accusing his opponent of a lucky draw. "By Jove, old chap, your luck's a bit too good this evening, eh?" he might jest, a twinkle in his eye. It was comfortable, respectable, and a world apart from the perceived squalor of steerage. Interestingly, many of the second-class passengers had initially booked passage on other, less prestigious ships, but were transferred to the Titanic due to the ongoing coal strike in Britain. This unexpected upgrade meant they found themselves enjoying amenities far superior to what they had originally anticipated. Imagine the delight, the pleasant surprise of discovering your humble cabin was suddenly a relatively luxurious space on the grandest ship in the world. It was a stroke of luck, a pleasant twist of fate that, tragically, would soon be overshadowed by an unimaginable turn of events. Historians still argue whether the White Star Line genuinely prioritised the safety of its second-class passengers as much as it did its first-class patrons, particularly concerning lifeboat access and information dissemination during the crisis. While they enjoyed better facilities than third class, the class distinction still played a significant role when disaster struck. The dining schedule was structured but not overly rigid, allowing passengers to enjoy their meals at leisure. Breakfast often consisted of hearty English fare, eggs, bacon, sausages, and toast, all washed down with strong tea or coffee. Lunch offered a lighter selection, perhaps cold cuts, salads, and soups. Dinner, as always, was the highlight, a multi-course affair that promised satisfaction for even the most discerning palate. The service was attentive, if not quite as polished as in first class, with a dedicated team of stewards and waitstaff ensuring every need was met. The clatter of cutlery, the soft murmur of conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter created a lively and convivial atmosphere. Even the cabins themselves offered a surprising degree of variety. Some were simple, single berths, perfect for solo travellers, or those on a budget, while others were larger, designed for families, with adjoining doors that allowed for a sense of privacy and connection. Each cabin, regardless of size, featured a porthole that offered a glimpse of the endless ocean, a constant reminder of the journey they were undertaking. The beds were comfortable, often with fresh linens changed daily, a small luxury that added to the overall sense of well-being. It was a far cry from the cramped communal berths of earlier transatlantic crossings, a testament to the advancements in passenger comfort that the Titanic embodied. The children in second class also had their own spaces, albeit less structured than those in first class. They might have played simple games on the deck, or perhaps gathered in one of the general rooms for storytelling. One can imagine a group of excited youngsters, perhaps a little too loud for some of the older passengers, running along the deck, their imaginations soaring as high as the ship's mast. A cheeky little boy might even try to sneak a peek into the first-class areas, only to be gently shooed away by a stern-faced steward. "Now, young man, those areas are for first-class passengers only," he might say, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. This strict adherence to class divisions was a defining characteristic of the era, a social architecture that extended even to the very layout of the ship. As the days unfolded, a comfortable routine settled in. Passengers would wake to the gentle sway of the ship, enjoy a leisurely breakfast, and then spend their mornings reading, socialising, or simply gazing out at the vast expanse of the ocean. Afternoons might involve a walk on the deck, a game of shuffleboard, or a quiet conversation in one of the lounges. Evenings culminated in the grand dinner, followed by a stroll under the stars or a game of cards. There was a sense of calm, of serene passage, as the Titanic ploughed through the North Atlantic, seemingly immune to any external threat. The sheer scale of the ship, her perceived impregnability, fostered a sense of utter security among those aboard. It was easy to forget that they were in fact merely a tiny speck on a vast and unpredictable ocean, a fragile human creation navigating the awesome power of nature. The very air itself seemed to hum with anticipation, a collective eagerness for the shores of America. For many, this was not just a journey, it was a transition, a new beginning. The second-class passengers, perhaps more than any other group, embodied this hope. They were not fleeing destitution, nor were they merely indulging in leisure. They were building a future, seizing an opportunity that the new world promised. And in the comfortable, respectable embrace of the Titanic's second-class accommodations, they felt confident that they were doing so with dignity and grace. The ship itself seemed to whisper promises of success and prosperity, lulling everyone into a false sense of security that would, within a few short days, be shattered in the most unimaginable way. The gentle rocking of the ship, the steady thrum of the engines all contributed to this pervasive sense of calm, a deceptive tranquility before the storm. Stepping below the comfortable confines of second class, one entered a vastly different world. The third class, or steerage, accommodations. For many, this was the heart of the Titanic's human story, a vibrant, bustling melting pot of nationalities and aspirations. It wasn't about luxury here, it was about efficiency, about moving large numbers of people across the ocean as affordably as possible. Yet even in steerage, the Titanic offered conditions far superior to many of her contemporaries. Gone were the vast, open dormitories of earlier ships. Instead, passengers found themselves in small, relatively private cabins, often accommodating 2, 4, or 6 people. These cabins were simple, with sturdy wooden bunks, a wash basin, and perhaps a small mirror, but they provided a degree of personal space that was revolutionary for immigrant travel. The sheer diversity within third class was staggering. Irish farmers, Italian artisans, Scandinavian labourers, Eastern European families fleeing persecution. They all converged here, united by the shared dream of a new life in America. Imagine the babble of languages, the mix of accents, the scent of different cuisines wafting through the corridors. It was a cacophony, but a harmonious one, brimming with hope and determination. Children, often indistinguishable in their excitement, ran through the communal areas, playing improvised games, their laughter echoing off the steel bulkheads. A mainstream historical fact is that many third-class passengers had saved for years, often pooling family resources just to afford the passage. For them, the Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was a pathway to freedom, a gamble on a better future. The dining arrangements in third class were communal, featuring long tables where passengers gathered for meals. The food, while certainly not gourmet, was wholesome and plentiful. Stew, boiled potatoes, bread and tea were staples. It was hearty, sustaining fare designed to fuel the arduous journey. Stewards would serve family style, encouraging camaraderie and conversation among strangers, who would soon become temporary travel companions. One could easily imagine an elderly Irish woman sharing stories of her homeland with a young Italian couple, perhaps using hand gestures and broken English to bridge the language barrier. "Ah, sure, and didn't we have a grand time at the fair last year," she might say, her eyes twinkling with reminiscence. The social spaces for third-class passengers were more limited, but still provided opportunities for recreation and community. There was a general room on D-deck, often referred to as the third-class common room, where men and women could socialise, play cards or simply relax. It was a lively space, often filled with the sounds of traditional music, perhaps an accordion or a fiddle, brought aboard by a musically inclined passenger. Dancing would break out spontaneously, Irish jigs mingling with Italian tarantellas, a vibrant celebration of shared humanity despite linguistic and cultural differences. Another common area was the third-class smoking room, a more male-dominated space where men could discuss their hopes for America, share tips on finding work, or simply enjoy a quiet smoke. Imagine the scent of cheap tobacco and the murmur of serious, hopeful conversations. A quirky or fringe tidbit often overlooked is that the Titanic provided numerous bathtubs for third-class passengers, a significant luxury for the time, as many of them would not have had running water or proper bathing facilities in their homes. While not private en-suites, the availability of clean, warm water for bathing was a genuine mark of the Titanic's superior accommodations, even for its lowest-paying passengers. It might have led to some gentle teasing. "Don't you be hogging all the hot water now, Seamus," one man might joke to another as they waited their turn for a refreshing scrub. The third-class promenade deck on the aft end of the ship was an invaluable space, offering fresh air and an unparalleled view of the ocean. Here, families would gather, children would play, and individuals would stand silently, gazing out at the vast, indifferent sea, dreaming of the opportunities that lay beyond the horizon. It was a place for quiet contemplation, for shared anxieties, and for bonding over the shared experience of the voyage. The sheer scale of the ocean, stretching endlessly in every direction, must have been both awe-inspiring and slightly daunting. The daily routine in third class was less structured than in the upper decks. Passengers largely governed their own time, rising when they pleased, eating when the communal dining room was open, and occupying themselves with conversation, games, or simply watching the waves. There was a strong sense of community that quickly developed, a camaraderie born from shared circumstances and shared hopes. Those who spoke the same language naturally gravitated towards each other, forming small enclaves of familiarity amidst the larger, bustling environment. But there was also a pervasive feeling of openness, a willingness to help and connect with others, perhaps a reflection of the shared vulnerability inherent in leaving everything behind for an unknown future. Historians still argue whether the physical segregation of third-class passengers, particularly the locked gates and separate stairwells intended to prevent the spread of disease, contributed directly to the higher mortality rates among them during the sinking. While the stated purpose was public health, these barriers became deadly obstacles when the ship began to sink, slowing down access to the boat deck. This debate touches upon deeply ingrained social attitudes of the era, where class distinctions extended even to emergency protocols. It wasn't a malicious plot, but a consequence of prevailing social norms and design priorities. The Titanic's arrival in America was not just a destination for these passengers, it was a rebirth. For many, it was the first time they had ever left their home country, the first time they had seen such a grand vessel, the first time they had contemplated such a vast journey. The dreams they carried were immense, promises of land, of jobs, of escaping poverty or political oppression. These dreams were often fragile, built on hearsay and hopeful exaggeration, but they were powerful enough to propel them across an entire ocean. Imagine the weight of those hopes, the quiet prayers whispered at night in their small cabins, the sheer emotional baggage that travelled with each individual. The sheer lack of personal space and privacy compared to first class was noticeable. While cabins were a step up from previous ships, they were still compact, often requiring passengers to share close quarters with strangers. This fostered an immediate intimacy, a forced familiarity that could lead to either firm friendships or simmering tensions. One could imagine a lively discussion turning into a good-natured argument over who snored the loudest, or who hogged the limited space on the communal bench. Yet, despite these minor inconveniences, the prevailing mood was one of optimism. They were on the grandest ship in the world, heading towards a new life. What could possibly go wrong? The children in particular seemed to thrive on the freedom of the ship, exploring every permissible nook and cranny. They were often found chasing each other on the open decks, their youthful energy boundless. A small girl might be seen clutching a worn doll, whispering secrets to it as the ship cut through the waves. A group of boys might huddle together, excitedly discussing what life in New York would be like, their imaginations running wild with visions of skyscrapers and endless opportunities. These innocent moments, filled with unbridled joy, stand in stark contrast to the grim fate that awaited many of them. The Titanic, for a fleeting few days, was their temporary home, a floating village of hopeful souls, unaware of the impending catastrophe that would utterly redefine their journey and, for too many, end their dreams forever. The very air they breathed, filled with the scent of sea and the promise of a future, would soon be replaced by the biting cold of the Atlantic. Beyond the passengers, a vast and often unseen army toiled to keep the Titanic a seamless, luxurious machine. The crew, over 800 individuals, a true city within a city, worked tirelessly in various capacities, from the officers on the bridge to the firemen shoveling coal deep in the bowels of the ship. Their lives were dictated by strict routines, long hours, and the rigid hierarchy of maritime service. While passengers enjoyed elegant dinners and leisurely strolls, the crew ensured the smooth operation of every single aspect of the vessel, often unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. At the very top were the deck officers, led by Captain Edward Smith, a seasoned veteran of the White Star Line, known for his calm demeanour and extensive experience. Below him were the First Officer Murdoch, Second Officer Lightoller, and a host of junior officers, each responsible for navigation, watchkeeping, and the overall safety of the ship. Their days were a relentless cycle of charting courses, monitoring instruments, and maintaining a vigilant lookout. A mainstream historical fact often highlighted is that Captain Smith was scheduled to retire after the Titanic's maiden voyage, adding a poignant layer to the tragedy. This was meant to be his swan song, a triumphant final journey on the grandest ship ever built. Below the officers were the engineering crew, a legion of highly skilled individuals responsible for the ship's immense propulsion system. This included the chief engineer Joseph Bell and his team of engineers, electricians and plumbers. Their domain was the throbbing heart of the Titanic, the engine rooms, boiler rooms and dynamo rooms. Imagine the deafening roar of the engines, the intense heat radiating from the massive boilers, the rhythmic clang of shovels as firemen fed mountains of coal into hungry furnaces. These men worked in brutal conditions, their faces often streaked with soot, their bodies constantly vibrating with the ship's powerful machinery. A quirky tidbit is that the sheer volume of coal consumed by the Titanic was staggering, around 600 tons per day, requiring 176 firemen to shovel it constantly. It was a Herculean task, a fiery inferno maintained by human muscle and sweat. You certainly wouldn't last 10 minutes in those conditions, not with your delicate modern respiratory system. Then there was the vast steward staff, the smiling, attentive faces who served the passengers. These included chief stewards, dining room stewards, cabin stewards, bath stewards, and even gym instructors and Turkish bath attendants. Their primary role was to cater to the every whim of the passengers, from serving meals and making beds to drawing baths and polishing shoes. They navigated the intricate social customs of the different classes, understanding that a first-class passenger required a different level of deference than someone in second or third class. They were the silent architects of the passenger experience, working long shifts, often on their feet for 18 hours a day, all while maintaining a polite and cheerful demeanour. One can picture a cabin steward discreetly arranging a forgotten tie, or a dining room steward seamlessly refilling a wine glass without interrupting a conversation. "More claret, sir?" he might inquire softly, almost imperceptibly. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, occupied a unique and critical position. They were technically employees of Marconi, not the White Star Line, but their role in communication was indispensable. Their small, buzzing room, filled with the crackle of static, was the ship's only real link to the outside world. They relayed passenger messages, received weather reports, and tragically processed ice warnings. Their work was demanding, often requiring them to be on duty for extended periods, listening intently to the faint signals drifting across the airwaves. Historians still argue whether the volume of non-essential passenger telegrams contributed to the fatal oversight of crucial ice warnings. The sheer number of "wish you were here," "having a grand time." Messages might have overwhelmed the operators, masking the truly urgent dispatches. Other essential crew members included the kitchen staff, a brigade of chefs, cooks and scullery workers who worked tirelessly in the ship's state-of-the-art galleys, preparing thousands of meals each day. Bakers churned out fresh bread and pastries, butchers prepared cuts of meat, and pastry chefs crafted intricate desserts. The smells emanating from the galleys must have been intoxicating, a symphony of savoury aromas and sweet confections. Then there were the engineers, the unsung heroes who kept the plumbing, lighting and ventilation systems running smoothly, ensuring the ship was always comfortable and functional. The seamen and firemen, collectively known as the Black Gang due to the grime of their work, made up the largest segment of the crew. Seamen handled the ship's rigging, cleaned the decks, and assisted with mooring. Firemen, as mentioned, were engaged in the relentless, sweaty work of feeding the boilers. Their living conditions were basic, often cramped, a stark contrast to the luxurious accommodations above. They slept in dormitory-style berths, ate in communal messes, and had little leisure time. Their lives were defined by hard labour and strict adherence to orders. One could almost hear the hearty, sometimes coarse, laughter from their quarters, a way to blow off steam after hours of strenuous work. "Another scoop then for old Blimey," one might yell, wiping sweat from his brow. The musicians, though employed by a separate agency and technically passengers, were vital to the ship's ambiance. There were two distinct orchestras, one playing lighter, more popular tunes, and the other specialising in classical music. They performed in various venues throughout the ship, from the first-class dining saloon to the lounges, providing a constant soundtrack to the voyage. Their professionalism and dedication would later become legendary, playing on even as the ship sank around them. Imagine the surreal scene of elegantly dressed musicians continuing to play a waltz as the ship tilted, a macabre ballet of impending doom. The ship's postal clerks, a small but crucial team, managed the immense volume of mail being transported across the Atlantic. They sorted letters, parcels and telegrams, ensuring efficient delivery once the ship reached New York. Their dedicated work was essential for maintaining communication between continents, a vital service in an era before instant digital messaging. One can imagine them diligently stamping and sorting letters, perhaps occasionally pausing to read a snippet of a postcard, a fleeting glimpse into a stranger's life. Life for the crew was not glamorous, but it was often a reliable source of income, particularly for those from working-class backgrounds. For many, serving on a prestigious liner like the Titanic was a point of pride, a step up from grueling factory work or fishing. They lived by the bell, their shifts meticulously scheduled, their duties clearly defined. They were accustomed to the long stretches at sea, the camaraderie of their fellow crewmates, and the occasional glimpse of the wealthy passengers whose lives were so different from their own. They were the backbone of the ship, the unseen gears that kept the grand clockwork of the Titanic running smoothly. Historians still debate the efficacy of the crew's training, particularly concerning lifeboat drills. While drills were mandated, they were often cursory, and not all crew members were fully aware of their roles in an emergency. This lack of comprehensive training, combined with the fact that the ship was not designed to carry enough lifeboats for all passengers and crew, would prove to be a fatal flaw when the true test came. It's a sobering thought. All that effort, all that meticulous planning, yet fundamental oversights remained. As the days of the voyage progressed, the crew settled into their rhythms, a well-oiled machine humming with quiet efficiency. The firemen sweated in the depths, the stewards glided through the dining rooms, the officers maintained their vigilant watch. They were all cogs in a magnificent colossal mechanism, each indispensable to its operation. The ship, with its thousands of souls, both visible and unseen, continued its inexorable journey across the tranquil North Atlantic, towards an encounter that would shatter the illusion of invincibility and expose the raw, brutal truth of human vulnerability in the face of nature's indifference. The very air they breathed, filled with the scent of coal smoke and salt, carried an unspoken, terrible destiny. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the evening of April 14th, 1912, a palpable shift occurred across the vast expanse of the Titanic. The carefree atmosphere that had characterised the preceding days began to subtly transform, ushering in the anticipation of the ship's final grand dinner at sea. This was the night before the scheduled arrival in New York, and passengers across all classes began their preparations, each according to their station, for an evening that promised both social engagement and a touch of melancholy at the impending end of the voyage. The crisp sea air had turned noticeably colder, a subtle hint of the Arctic conditions that lay ahead. For the first-class passengers, the ritual of preparing for dinner was an elaborate affair. Ladies retired to their spacious staterooms, assisted by their personal maids, to select the most exquisite gowns from their extensive wardrobes. Silks rustled, jewels sparkled under the electric lights, and the scent of expensive perfumes filled the air. Hair was meticulously styled, often piled high in elaborate coiffures, adorned with feathers or glittering pins. Men donned their finest evening wear, crisp white shirts, perfectly tied bow ties, and impeccably tailored dinner jackets. The sound of quiet chatter, the occasional tinkle of a crystal glass, and the soft strains of distant music from one of the ship's orchestras would have drifted through the corridors of the upper decks. This was a final flourish of Edwardian elegance, a display of wealth and sophistication before disembarking into the bustling anonymity of New York. Imagine the gentle rustle of a satin gown as a woman glides past, her silhouette framed by the polished wood of the corridor, a picture of serene composure. Down in second class, the preparations were less extravagant, but still carried a sense of occasion. While there were no personal maids, passengers took great care with their appearance. Ladies chose their best dresses, perhaps a sensible wool or a pretty cotton, ensuring they were clean and pressed. Gentlemen put on their best suits, perhaps a dark lounge suit rather than a full tuxedo, but still aiming for a smart and respectable appearance. The atmosphere was one of pleasant anticipation, a respectable middle-class evening out. Families would help each other, parents buttoning up children's jackets, or a wife adjusting her husband's tie. It was a shared moment of preparation, a quieter, more intimate ritual compared to the lavish display upstairs. A quirky tidbit is that even in second class, passengers often brought special accessories for dinner, like opera glasses. Even if they had no opera to attend, it was more about the perceived social status. "Wouldn't want to miss a thing, would we, dear?" one might quip, holding up a pair of polished brass binoculars. In third class, the preparations were far more practical, yet still imbued with a sense of dignity. Passengers changed out of their day clothes into their cleaner, perhaps slightly less worn attire. For many, this might have been the only other set of clothes they possessed. Women might have put on a simple clean dress and tied a fresh ribbon in their hair. Men might have changed into a clean shirt and their least worn trousers. There was less emphasis on fashion, and more on cleanliness and respectability. The communal washrooms would have been busy, with families taking turns to freshen up after a long day at sea. Despite the humble nature of their preparations, there was still a desire to present themselves well, to mark the occasion of the final evening meal on the unsinkable ship. You might hear the splash of water and the quiet murmur of mothers trying to tame unruly children's hair. Stand still now. Don't you want to look smart for dinner? As the evening progressed, the ship's lighting took on a warmer, more inviting glow. The hundreds of electric lights, a modern marvel for the era, cast soft pools of light across the decks and through the portholes, transforming the ship into a beacon cutting through the darkening Atlantic. The contrast between the illuminated interiors and the vast inky blackness of the ocean outside would have been striking, creating a sense of cosy isolation, a comforting bubble adrift in the immensity. It was a testament to human ingenuity, turning the wild, untamed sea into a civilized, domesticated space, at least for a few fleeting hours. The ship's orchestras began their evening performances, their melodies drifting through the various public rooms. The first-class orchestra, typically playing classical pieces and popular operettas, would have filled the air with sophisticated sounds, inviting couples to dance in the reception rooms or simply providing a refined background to conversation. In second class, the music might have been slightly livelier, perhaps a waltz or a foxtrot, encouraging a more relaxed atmosphere. Even in third class, informal musical gatherings might have broken out, with passengers bringing out their own instruments, a fiddle, a guitar or an accordion, for a spontaneous session of folk music and dancing. Historians still argue whether the distinct musical choices for each class subtly reinforced the existing social hierarchies, even in leisure activities. Was it merely a reflection of taste, or a deliberate means of maintaining separation? For many, this final evening was also a time for reflection and anticipation. First-class magnates might have discussed their impending business ventures in New York, their fortunes poised to grow even larger. Second-class families might have quietly debated the best neighbourhoods to settle in, or the types of jobs they hoped to find. Third-class immigrants, perhaps with a knot of anxiety mixed with their excitement, might have whispered prayers for safe passage and a prosperous future, their dreams of America burning brightly. The air was thick with unspoken hopes and quiet anxieties, all swirling beneath the veneer of polite conversation and festive cheer. The crew, too, prepared for their evening duties, albeit with a different focus. Stewards donned their freshly pressed uniforms, ready for the relentless pace of dinner service. Kitchen staff sharpened their knives, prepared their stations, and braced themselves for the culinary marathon ahead. Firemen, already grimy from their shifts, prepared for the next rotation, their minds perhaps drifting to the warmth of their bunks once their arduous work was done. Even Captain Smith and his officers would prepare for their final evening watch, perhaps a quiet moment of contemplation on the bridge, gazing out at the vast, tranquil ocean, completely unaware of the deadly secret it held just a few miles ahead. As darkness fully enveloped the ship, the sense of isolation from the rest of the world deepened. No land in sight, only the vast, indifferent ocean stretching to the horizon. The Titanic, a self-contained universe, glowed like a magnificent jewel against the inky blackness, her lights reflecting off the calm, dark waters. It was a perfect, peaceful night for a journey, the kind of night that lulled one into a profound sense of security and well-being. The gentle rocking of the ship, the distant hum of the engines, the muffled sounds of conversation and music, all contributed to a pervasive feeling of safety, a profound belief in the unsinkable promise. A cheeky joke often circulated among passengers was about the ship's sheer size. "They say you could get lost on this ship," a gentleman might quip to his dining companion. "I swear I saw a chap setting up a small village somewhere near the stern." A slight exaggeration, perhaps, but it highlighted the almost unfathomable scale of the vessel, contributing to the feeling of being on solid ground rather than a fragile vessel afloat on a vast ocean. This comfort, this sense of being secure within a contained world, was a powerful illusion, one that would soon be shattered by the brute force of nature. The anticipation of dinner, then, was not just about the food or the company, it was about the ritual, the shared experience of this grand voyage nearing its triumphant conclusion. It was a moment to savour the final hours of this unique journey, to celebrate the luxury, the speed, and the sheer audacity of human endeavour. No one foresaw the chilling irony of this collective anticipation, the fact that this evening of lavish meals and lively conversation would be the last for so many, a final, unaware farewell to life itself. The air, seemingly still and calm, held the quiet tension of an uncoiling spring, ready to snap with devastating force. As the evening settled fully over the Titanic on April 14th, the ship's grand dining saloons began to hum with the orchestrated symphony of high society at its apex. This was the crescendo of the culinary experience, the evening meal, a multi-course affair that transcended mere sustenance and became a social event in itself. For the first-class passengers, the dining saloon on D-deck was transformed into a glittering spectacle, a cavernous hall adorned with ornate columns, sparkling chandeliers, and plush red carpeting. The air was thick with the scent of fine cuisine, expensive perfumes, and the murmur of sophisticated conversation. At tables draped with crisp white damask linen, gleaming silver cutlery, and polished crystalware, men in their black tie and women in their most exquisite evening gowns settled in. The menu was a testament to Edwardian excess and culinary artistry. Imagine course after course: oysters, consommé fermier, cream of barley soup, poached salmon with mousseline sauce and cucumber, followed by a choice of lamb with mint sauce, roasted duckling with applesauce, or sirloin of beef with horseradish cream. And this was just a fraction. There were also fancy potatoes, green peas, creamed carrots, and then a parade of roasts, chicken, pigeon, and even a selection of cold dishes like asparagus vinaigrette and pâté de foie gras. The sheer volume and variety was staggering, a testament to the dozens of chefs toiling in the spotless galleys below. The wine flowed freely, a selection of the finest vintages from the ship's vast cellar. Stewards, impeccably dressed and trained, moved with an almost balletic grace, anticipating needs before they were even articulated. A glass was refilled without a sound, a plate whisked away as if by magic. The conversation at the tables was often lively, discussions ranging from politics and finance to the latest scandals of the aristocracy. Marriages were subtly arranged, business deals informally sealed, and social hierarchies reinforced with every carefully chosen word. One could easily imagine a sharp-witted dowager offering a cutting remark about a rival's diamond necklace, or a wealthy industrialist expounding on the future of his empire. "My dear, did you see Mrs. Vanderbilt's pearls? Quite ostentatious, wouldn't you say?" she might whisper behind her fan. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is the orchestra's role in enhancing the dining experience. While often associated with the ship's final moments, the musicians played throughout dinner, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to the meal. The first-class orchestra, a quintet, performed classical selections, their melodies weaving through the clinking of cutlery and the gentle hum of conversation. It was a subtle yet essential element of the atmosphere, adding to the feeling of refined luxury. Beyond the formal dining, many first-class passengers might have retreated to the à la carte restaurant, or the Café Parisien on the boat deck, which offered more intimate settings and a slightly different menu. These venues provided a more exclusive dining experience, allowing guests to order whatever they pleased, whenever they pleased, for an additional charge. The Café Parisien, in particular, was designed to evoke a chic Parisian sidewalk café, complete with wicker chairs and latticework, offering a glimpse of European sophistication in the middle of the Atlantic. It was here that some might have lingered over coffee and liqueurs, engaging in more private conversations, perhaps even a clandestine flirtation. In second class, the dinner was still an impressive affair, though naturally a notch below the first-class extravagance. The dining saloon on D-deck, while smaller, was still elegantly appointed, with polished wood and comfortable seating. The menu, while perhaps lacking some of the exotic ingredients of first class, was still substantial and delicious. Roast chicken, baked potatoes and plum pudding were common offerings. The atmosphere was more convivial, less formal. Families dined together, and there was a louder, more robust hum of conversation. Laughter was perhaps more readily heard, and the occasional burst of enthusiastic chatter. A quirky tidbit is that second-class passengers were often served in courses as well, with printed menus, providing a sense of formality and luxury that was often absent on other ships. This attention to detail underscored the Titanic's superior standards, even for its mid-tier passengers. The socialising continued after dinner. In first class, gentlemen might adjourn to the smoking room, a grand space with dark wood panelling, leather armchairs, and a large fireplace, where they would smoke cigars, play cards, and discuss business or politics. The air would be thick with cigar smoke and the scent of brandy. Ladies might gather in the spacious lounge or the reading and writing room, perhaps playing bridge, engaging in polite conversation, or simply enjoying the comfort of their surroundings. Others might have gone to the reception room on the boat deck to listen to the orchestra, perhaps taking a turn on the dance floor. The general atmosphere was one of leisurely enjoyment, a conscious unwinding after the day's activities. You can almost hear the soft click of billiard balls from the adjacent game room, or the gentle rustle of cards being dealt. In second class, similar activities unfolded, albeit in less opulent settings. The second-class smoking room was a popular haunt for men, while women might gather in the general room for conversation or quiet games. The camaraderie was perhaps stronger here, a shared sense of contentment among those enjoying a comfortable journey without the weight of immense wealth. One might have heard a lively debate about the merits of different sports teams, or a heartfelt discussion about the challenges of starting a new life. "Ah, but the Yankees, they've got a pitcher that'll strike fear into any man's heart," a passionate fan might declare. Historians still argue whether the apparent calm and leisurely pace of these evening activities inadvertently contributed to the initial lack of urgency when the first signs of trouble emerged. The pervasive belief in the ship's invincibility, combined with a comfortable routine of luxury, may have made it harder for people to grasp the reality of danger. The very design of the ship, which minimized vibrations and external noise, further insulated passengers from the world outside their elegant bubble. As the night wore on, the ship's pace remained steady, cutting through the remarkably calm, flat sea. The temperature continued to drop, and a keen eye might have noticed the absence of moonlight, contributing to the exceptional darkness of the ocean surface. While most passengers remained oblivious to the subtle changes in their environment, the crew on the bridge would have been increasingly aware of the dropping temperature, a telltale sign of ice nearby. Yet the routine of luxury and pleasure continued uninterrupted, a testament to the belief that nothing could possibly threaten this magnificent vessel. The final dance, the last glass of champagne, the hushed goodnights, all were performed under the unseeing eyes of destiny, each moment drawing the unsuspecting passengers closer to the unimaginable. The air, though growing colder, still hummed with the warmth of human connection and quiet anticipation. With dinner concluding and the clatter of silverware fading, the evening of April 14th, 1912, on the Titanic segued seamlessly into a period of more relaxed, yet still refined, entertainment and socialising. The grand dining saloons began to empty, and passengers dispersed to various public rooms, seeking out activities that suited their individual tastes, all against the backdrop of a steadily darkening, increasingly cold Atlantic night. The ship hummed with a gentle, contented energy, a pervasive sense of well-being that permeated every deck. For the first-class passengers, the options for evening diversion were plentiful and sophisticated. Many gentlemen gravitated towards the smoking room, a bastion of masculine camaraderie located on a deck near the grand staircase. The room was a study in rich mahogany and leather, with large, comfortable armchairs inviting deep conversation. The air would have been thick with the scent of fine Havana cigars and expensive brandy, mingled with the occasional whiff of pipe tobacco. Here, men discussed business deals, shared political opinions, played cards, bridge, poker, or perhaps even a quiet game of chess. The clink of glasses, the murmur of voices, and the occasional burst of hearty laughter created a club-like atmosphere, a retreat from the more formal dining experience. One might overhear John Jacob Astor IV discussing his latest real estate venture, or Benjamin Guggenheim lamenting the vagaries of the stock market. Another point, I believe, a player might declare, tapping a card onto the felt table, a smug smile playing on his lips. Meanwhile, the ladies often congregated in the first-class lounge or the reading and writing room, both elegant spaces designed for more genteel pursuits. In the lounge, situated on a deck, the ship's orchestra, a small but accomplished ensemble, played lighter classical pieces or popular tunes of the day. Couples might take a turn on the polished dance floor, gliding gracefully to a waltz or a two-step. Others simply listened, perhaps engaging in quiet conversation, or enjoying a spot of after-dinner tea. The reading and writing room, slightly more sedate, offered plush seating and abundant light, perfect for penning letters on embossed stationery or delving into a novel. The rustle of turning pages and the soft scratching of fountain pens would have been the dominant sounds. A quirky tidbit, often overlooked, is that the Titanic squash court, located on G-deck, was also available for use in the evenings, though perhaps less frequented than the more social spaces. Imagine a few energetic souls, perhaps working off their opulent dinner, engaging in a vigorous game, the thwack of the ball echoing in the depths of the ship. For those seeking more informal entertainment, the Café Parisien on the boat deck offered a charming open-air ambiance, though enclosed by glass screens to protect from the elements. With its wicker chairs and lattice work, it simulated a Parisian street cafe, providing a relaxed setting for coffee, liqueurs and conversation. It was a favourite spot for younger, more fashionable couples who might have found the formality of the main lounge a bit stifling. Here, one might have heard more flirtatious banter, lighter gossip, and perhaps even the planning of future rendezvous in New York. "Darling, you simply must see the latest collection at Worth's once we arrive," a lady might enthuse to her companion. In second class, the evening entertainments were less numerous, but still well attended. The second-class smoking room offered a comfortable space for gentlemen, similar in function to its first-class counterpart, though simpler in decor. Card games, discussions, and the sharing of travel anecdotes would have been common. The general room served as a multi-purpose lounge where men and women could gather. Here, impromptu musical performances by talented passengers sometimes occurred, or lively card games like whist or cribbage. There was a more palpable sense of community, with passengers perhaps more inclined to mix and mingle outside their immediate travel parties. A group might gather around a piano, singing popular folk songs or hymns, their voices blending in a harmonious, if not always perfectly tuned, chorus. Historians still debate whether the less formal atmosphere in second and third class fostered a stronger sense of communal support that might have influenced behaviour during the subsequent emergency. The third-class passengers, while having fewer dedicated spaces, also found ways to enjoy their evenings. The third-class general room was a hub of activity. This large, relatively unadorned space often hosted spontaneous gatherings. Impromptu dances were common, with passengers bringing out accordions, fiddles and banjos, filling the air with lively jigs, reels and polkas. The joy of movement, the release of energy after a day of travel, was infectious. Men might have gathered in the third-class smoking room, swapping stories of their homelands and discussing their hopes for the new life awaiting them in America. They might have played simple games of cards, perhaps with pennies or matches as stakes, or simply shared a quiet camaraderie. The conversations here were often earnest, filled with dreams of prosperity and freedom. America, she's the land of opportunity, eh, Giuseppe? One might say to another, a hopeful glint in his eye. A mainstream historical fact often emphasised is that despite the rigid class distinctions, some passengers would occasionally cross the boundaries, usually with permission or a discreet nod. For example, some second-class passengers might visit the first-class lounge if invited by a friend, or if the steward was feeling particularly lenient. However, the reverse was less common, a testament to the societal norms of the era. The ship was meticulously designed to maintain these separations, both physically and socially. As the evening wore on, the ship's speed remained constant, cutting through the flat, almost unnervingly calm waters. The absence of a moon meant the ocean was a vast inky blackness, reflecting no light, offering no warning. The air on deck grew increasingly sharp, biting with a cold that suggested more than just the usual spring chill. Passengers strolling on the promenades, perhaps taking a final breath of crisp sea air before retiring, might have noticed the sudden drop in temperature. Some might have even spotted the faint shimmer of phosphorescence in the water, a beautiful but eerie natural phenomenon that would later be associated with the stillness of the ocean before the collision. A few might have remarked on it, perhaps to a companion, "Isn't that peculiar? How still the water is tonight?" The quiet conversations, the games of cards, the gentle strains of music, the anticipation of a good night's sleep, all these mundane human activities continued unaware of the invisible, monumental threat rapidly approaching. The illusion of safety, bolstered by the ship's reputation and the serene conditions, was absolute. The very structure of the ship, designed to be quiet and stable, insulated its occupants from the subtle vibrations or unusual sounds that might have hinted at impending danger. This was a night of calm before the storm, a final moment of innocent enjoyment before the unimaginable chaos of the early hours of April 15th. The entire ship, from its grandest saloons to its humblest cabins, was a fragile bubble of human life, blissfully ignorant of the icy embrace awaiting it. While passengers dined, socialised and prepared for bed, an entirely different kind of activity was unfolding in the small crackling room designated as the Marconi wireless office on the boat deck. Here, two young men, senior wireless operator Jack Phillips and junior wireless operator Harold Bride, were engaged in the relentless, often monotonous but supremely vital task of maintaining the Titanic's communication with the outside world. Their equipment, a powerful new Marconi set, was a marvel of its age, allowing the ship to send and receive messages across hundreds of miles of ocean. The air in the wireless room was a constant symphony of static, the rhythmic tapping of Morse code and the low hum of the machinery. Jack Phillips, the senior operator, was primarily responsible for sending and receiving passenger telegrams, Marconigrams as they were called, a lucrative service for which the White Star Line charged a premium. These were often mundane messages, "Arriving Wednesday, love," or "Business progressing, details soon." But they represented a significant portion of the operator's workload, and Phillips was under pressure to clear the backlog, especially with the impending arrival in New York. A mainstream historical fact is that the Titanic's powerful wireless system was actually one of its selling points, promoting the idea that passengers could remain connected even in the middle of the Atlantic. This very capability, however, would ironically contribute to the challenges of its final hours. As the evening wore on, the volume of passenger traffic remained high, a testament to the novelty and popularity of the wireless service. Phillips, tired from long hours, was diligently working through the pile of messages. He wore headphones, his fingers expertly tapping out replies or transcribing incoming signals. Harold Bride, the junior operator, often assisted, but Phillips largely bore the brunt of the commercial traffic. Imagine the sheer concentration required, distinguishing faint signals from background noise, especially as distant stations often bled into each other. It was a tedious, demanding job, particularly with the prevailing business model of prioritising commercial messages. However, amidst the stream of trivial "wish you were here" messages, a different kind of signal began to filter through. Ice warnings. These crucial navigational advisories were sent by other ships in the North Atlantic, reporting the presence of icebergs and ice fields. The first warnings had actually arrived earlier in the day, but as dusk turned to night, more began to appear. One such message, received by Phillips at 9:40 p.m. ship's time, came from the Mesaba, reporting much ice, many large icebergs. This was a significant warning, but it was never delivered to the bridge. Why? Historians still argue whether the volume of commercial traffic, the non-standard format of the message, or a misjudgment of its urgency by Phillips led to its fateful omission. Was it simply an oversight born of exhaustion, or a conscious decision to prioritise profitable passenger messages over what might have seemed at the time like yet another routine ice report? Another warning, arguably the most critical, came from the Californian at 11 p.m. This message was explicit. We are stopped and surrounded by ice. The Californian was much closer to the Titanic's position, and this warning was not just about ice, but about a ship stopped by ice, implying a serious obstruction. However, the Californian signal was so strong, so loud in Phillips's ears, that it effectively blasted out his receiver. Phillips, frustrated by the interruption to his commercial traffic, famously snapped back, "Keep out." "Shut up! I'm working Cape Race." He dismissed the Californian's critical message, ordering them to cease transmission. This moment, more than any other, highlights the fatal confluence of human error, the relentless demands of a commercial enterprise, and the growing proximity to disaster. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the Marconi operators were paid by the message, which undoubtedly incentivized them to prioritize commercial traffic over what they might have perceived as routine navigational warnings. This pay structure, a seemingly innocuous detail, might have had a profound and terrible consequence on the events that unfolded. You can almost hear Phillips muttering to himself, "Another 'how's the weather' telegram. Don't they know I'm trying to make a living here?" The bridge officers, meanwhile, were not entirely oblivious to the possibility of ice. Earlier in the evening, Captain Smith had personally reviewed some ice warnings and even altered the ship's course slightly to the south, a common practice to avoid known ice fields. However, the exact positioning and density of the ice remained unknown to them, particularly the massive field of bergs and growlers that the Titanic was hurtling towards. The prevailing attitude was one of confidence. The ship was fast, capable, and most importantly, unsinkable. Speed was also a factor. The White Star Line was keen to make good time on the maiden voyage, eager to impress the public and perhaps even break a speed record. This subtle pressure for speed, combined with a sense of invincibility, created a dangerous cocktail of overconfidence. The lookouts in the crow's nest, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, also played a crucial role. Their duty was to scan the horizon for any obstacles. On this particular night, however, their task was made infinitely more difficult by several factors. The absence of a moon meant profound darkness. There was no breeze to create telltale ripples at the base of icebergs, and they were not equipped with binoculars. Historians still argue whether binoculars, if provided, would have made a difference in spotting the iceberg earlier. While some argue that the size of the berg made it visible to the naked eye, others contend that in such black conditions every advantage counted. It's a debate that highlights the what-if scenarios that haunt the Titanic's legacy. As the clock ticked past 11:30 p.m, the ship continued its relentless pace, slicing through the calm, frigid waters at nearly 22 knots. The temperature continued to plummet, dropping several degrees in a short span of time. This drastic temperature change, as water from the Labrador Current met warmer Gulf Stream waters, was another indicator of ice, a fact known to experienced mariners. Yet, for many aboard, the chill simply meant pulling a warmer coat closer, or perhaps ordering another hot drink. The atmosphere in the wireless room remained busy. Phillips continued to transmit messages to Cape Race, Newfoundland, the powerful Marconi station on the coast, which served as relay point for transatlantic communications. He was so engrossed in his task, so focused on clearing the backlog of commercial traffic, that the very serious and insistent warning from the Californian was perceived as an annoyance, a disruption to his workflow. The irony is excruciating. The lifeline to safety became, in that moment, a source of frustration, then a source of silence. The lookouts in the crow's nest shivered in the cold, their eyes straining against the profound darkness. The sea was eerily calm, like glass, making it impossible to see the telltale white fringe of waves breaking at the base of an iceberg, which would usually give away its presence. It was a perfect storm of environmental conditions, human error, and technological oversight, all converging on a single point in the vast empty ocean. The Titanic, designed for speed and luxury, was hurtling towards an unseen, silent menace. The last moments before impact were filled with the mundane sounds of a ship at sea, the distant hum of engines, the gentle creak of timbers, the almost imperceptible sway of the deck, all utterly innocent, utterly unaware. The serene calm of the North Atlantic on the night of April 14th, 1912, was about to be shattered. As the ship sliced through the eerily smooth, moonless sea, an unseen, silent behemoth lay directly in its path. At approximately 11:40 p.m. ship's time, the unthinkable happened. In the crow's nest, high above the glittering decks, lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee peered into the impenetrable darkness. They shivered in the biting cold, their eyes straining, searching for any ripple or shadow on the glassy surface of the ocean. The lack of moonlight meant visibility was exceptionally poor, and the absence of a breeze meant no white caps at the base of icebergs to give them away. Suddenly, out of the profound blackness, a shape materialized directly ahead. It wasn't just a shadow, it was a vast, dark mass, rising menacingly out of the water. Fleet immediately grabbed the telephone, ringing the bridge 3 times, the prearranged signal for an obstacle directly ahead. "Iceberg right ahead," he yelled into the receiver, his voice tight with urgency, the words hanging heavy in the cold night air. On the bridge, 6th Officer Moody took the call. His immediate reaction was swift. He relayed the message to First Officer William Murdoch, who was in charge of the watch. Murdoch, a highly experienced and competent officer, reacted instinctively. He immediately gave 3 commands that would forever be etched into history. Hard a starboard, meaning turn the wheel to the right to swing the bow to port. Stop both engines. Zrение. A затем, в следующую минуту, полный корм. Reverse both engines. The engine room telegraphs clanged, sending urgent signals down to the engineering staff, who scrambled to respond to the sudden, drastic change in orders. This was a critical moment, a frantic ballet of command and response, all unfolding in mere seconds. Deep in the engine rooms, the world shifted. The engineers, accustomed to the steady thrum of forward propulsion, now faced a sudden emergency. Massive steam valves were manipulated, gears ground into reverse, and the powerful reciprocating engines began to fight against their forward momentum. The ship vibrated intensely as the propellers, previously pushing the Titanic forward at nearly 22 knots, now strained to pull her back. It was a violent, almost visceral reaction from the colossal machinery. A mainstream historical fact often discussed is that reversing the engines may have actually hindered the turn. Some experts suggest that had the ship maintained its forward momentum and simply turned, it might have swung clear of the iceberg's most damaging impact points, or at least minimised the damage. But in the heat of the moment, Murdoch made the decision he believed was best. Up on deck, a few passengers noticed a subtle, yet unusual vibration or shudder run through the ship. For most, it was too slight to register, easily mistaken for a routine adjustment in the engines or a particularly large wave. But for some, particularly those in the lower decks, or those still awake and sensitive to the ship's movements, it was distinct. A clinking of glasses in the dining saloon, a slight tremor in the deck, a fleeting sense of disorientation. One might have thought, that's unusual. A woman, perhaps knitting in the lounge, might have paused, her needles momentarily still. A man in the smoking room might have looked up from his cards, a quizzical expression on his face. The actual impact with the iceberg was not a dramatic, grinding collision for most aboard. Instead, it was more of a glancing blow, a series of 5 distinct jarring rumbles along the starboard side of the hull, stretching over a length of approximately 200 feet. The iceberg, a colossal mass of ancient ice, scraped along the ship's side, creating a succession of narrow vertical gashes below the waterline. It wasn't a gaping hole, but rather a series of riveted seams springing open, allowing seawater to rush in. The ship's speed meant that the damage was spread out, like a giant can opener slicing along the length of the hull. A quirky tidbit. Some later analysis suggested that if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head-on, the damage would have been confined to the bow, potentially sparing more compartments and allowing the ship to stay afloat longer. The glancing blow, however, was far more damaging. It was a truly unfortunate angle of impact. Below decks, the immediate aftermath was more pronounced. In the third-class cabins towards the bow, the sound was louder, a distinct tearing or crunching noise, accompanied by a jolt that threw some passengers from their bunks. Water immediately began to pour into the forward compartments, the mailroom, the cargo holds, and the boiler rooms. Firemen working in boiler room number 6 heard a terrifying roar as icy water surged through a gaping tear in the hull, rushing in with incredible force. They scrambled to escape, narrowly avoiding being swept away by the deluge. The water level began to rise rapidly, sealing their fate and the fate of those compartments. On the bridge, Murdoch Captain Smith, who had rushed up from his cabin after feeling the tremor, and other officers quickly realised the gravity of the situation. The ship had barely swerved. The iceberg, like a ghostly apparition, scraped down the starboard side and then glided silently past, disappearing back into the blackness from which it came. There was no visible damage from the deck, no obvious sign of a catastrophe to the unsuspecting eye. Yet, the subtle vibrations, the sudden commands, and the growing list reported by the crew checking below decks told a horrifying story. Within minutes, reports flooded the bridge. Water was entering the ship at an alarming rate. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, was summoned immediately. He quickly assessed the damage, reviewing the plans and calculating the implications. His face, usually animated with enthusiasm for his magnificent creation, turned ashen. He knew, with a certainty born of intimate knowledge of the ship's design, that 5 of the ship's watertight compartments were breached. The Titanic was designed to stay afloat with up to 4 compartments flooded. 5 meant a fatal flaw. Historians still argue whether the steel used in the hull plates was brittle in the freezing temperatures of the North Atlantic, making it more susceptible to fracturing rather than bending under impact. This scientific debate about metallurgy adds another layer of complexity to the disaster, suggesting that even the materials themselves conspired against the ship. It's a chilling thought. The very structure designed to protect the ship might have betrayed it in the extreme cold. The first few minutes after impact were a strange mix of confusion and denial. Many passengers, especially those on the upper decks, had felt nothing at all. They continued their card games, their conversations, their quiet preparations for bed, utterly oblivious. Some might have felt a slight jolt but dismissed it as inconsequential. Perhaps a waiter had dropped a tray in the galley, or a wave had struck the hull unexpectedly. The widespread belief in the Titanic's unsinkability acted as a powerful psychological shield, making it almost impossible to comprehend that anything truly serious could have occurred. Unsinkable, they said, a passenger might have scoffed good-naturedly. I suppose even a mosquito couldn't dent this beast. But below decks the sounds were more insistent. The faint roar of rushing water, the hurried footsteps of crew members, the sharp clang of emergency doors being closed. The contrast between the luxurious calm above and the burgeoning chaos below was stark and terrible. The ship, once a symbol of human triumph over nature, was now wounded, mortally so, by a silent ancient enemy. The invisible damage was catastrophic, setting in motion a chain of events that would unfold with terrifying speed, irrevocably altering the fate of everyone aboard. The ship was no longer merely traversing the ocean. It was beginning its slow, majestic, and utterly doomed descent. In the immediate aftermath of the impact, a peculiar silence descended upon much of the Titanic, a quiet lull before the storm of panic. For the vast majority of passengers, especially those nestled comfortably in their first and second-class cabins or lingering in the public rooms, the collision with the iceberg registered as nothing more than a faint tremor, if anything at all. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible nudge, easily dismissed or attributed to the mundane sounds and movements of a ship at sea. This initial confusion and dismissal proved to be a critical factor in the unfolding tragedy, creating a dangerous delay in comprehension. Up on the boat deck, some passengers who were still strolling about noticed a distinct chill in the air, a sudden drop in temperature that was more intense than earlier in the evening. A few might have seen the ghostly white shape of the iceberg as it scraped past the ship's side, a colossal silent predator momentarily revealed before vanishing back into the inky blackness. Their initial reaction, however, was often one of curiosity, not alarm. "Good heavens, did you see that?" one might have exclaimed to a companion, pointing to the receding shape. "Looks like we've had a close shave." There was a general consensus, reinforced by the ship's reputation, that any incident would be minor. After all, this was the unsinkable Titanic. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Captain Smith, First Officer Murdoch and Quartermaster Robert Hitchens, who had been at the helm, were already grappling with the grim reality. They had felt the impact directly, seen the iceberg, and within minutes the first reports of rushing water from below decks began to confirm their worst fears. The rapid response from the mailroom staff was particularly telling. They immediately recognised the severity of the inrush, as sacks of letters and parcels began to float in rising water. This was no minor breach. This was serious. Down in the boiler rooms, the scene was one of terrifying chaos. Firemen and engineers scrambled to escape the torrent of icy water pouring into boiler rooms 5 and 6. The sound was deafening. A roar of water, the hiss of steam, and the shouts of men. These were the first undeniable witnesses to the ship's mortal wound. Those who made it out alive would carry the vivid memory of the deluge, the frantic scramble up ladders, and the chilling realization that their workplace, the very heart of the ship, was being consumed by the sea. A mainstream historical fact is that the rapid flooding of these boiler rooms meant that the ship's pumps, powerful as they were quickly overwhelmed and rendered useless in those compartments. As the officers tried to comprehend the full extent of the damage, they enlisted Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, who had been summoned from his cabin. Andrews, a quiet and meticulous man, quickly began his calculations armed with the ship's blueprints and a deep understanding of its structural integrity. He walked the length of the damaged compartments, observing the inrush of water, listening to the reports. His face, usually alight with the pride of creation, grew increasingly grim. He knew the ship's limitations. It could stay afloat with 4 flooded compartments. More than that, and it was doomed. When he returned to the bridge, his quiet, authoritative words sealed the Titanic's fate. 5, possibly 6, compartments were taking on water. He delivered the stark prognosis with quiet certainty. The ship is mortally wounded. The Titanic, he estimated, had an hour, perhaps an hour and a half, at most 2, before she would succumb. For the majority of passengers, however, this terrifying reality remained hidden behind a veil of calm. Stewards, often just as confused, were initially told to reassure passengers that there was no cause for alarm, perhaps just a slight scrape or a minor mechanical issue. Many passengers heard vague rumours, whispers of hitting something, but the ship remained brightly lit, seemingly stable, and the orchestras continued to play their soothing melodies. This initial official stance of reassurance, while perhaps well-intentioned to prevent panic, contributed to the slow understanding of the danger. A quirky tidbit is that some passengers, notably those who had felt the jolt more acutely, actually went out on deck to investigate, only to be met by a calm sea and crew members telling them to go back to bed. "There's nothing to worry about, madam, just a minor disturbance," a steward might have cheerfully insisted, completely unaware of the looming catastrophe. The lack of visible damage from the deck also played a crucial role in fostering this complacency. There was no gaping hole in the side of the ship for passengers to see, no dramatic listing, at first, to indicate imminent danger. The damage was below the waterline, insidious and unseen. It was almost as if the Titanic was deliberately hiding its mortal wound, allowing its passengers to linger in a false sense of security. Historians still argue whether a more immediate and transparent communication of the danger to passengers, even at the risk of inducing panic, might have saved more lives. The prevailing protocol of the era, however, favoured maintaining order and preventing alarm, often at the expense of full disclosure. This paternalistic approach, though common for its time, proved devastating on the Titanic. The psychological barrier of unsinkable was deeply ingrained, and it took time and visible signs for it to crack. As the minutes ticked by, however, subtle indicators began to appear. The ship's engineers, working heroically below, tried desperately to activate the pumps, but the inrush of water was too great. The water level in the forward compartments continued to rise. A gradual, almost imperceptible list to port began to develop, a subtle tilt that, over time, would become painfully obvious. Water also began to cascade into the lower decks of the forward section, pushing up through stairwells and flooding corridors. Some passengers, particularly those in third class who were housed closer to the bow, started to notice the cold water seeping into their cabins, or heard the increasing sounds of frantic activity from the crew. For them, the dismissals began to ring hollow. A young mother might wake to find her feet touching icy water on the cabin floor. Children more attuned to unusual sounds might point out the strange gurgling coming from behind the walls. A small boy might say, "Mummy, I hear water," his voice trembling with a child's intuitive fear. The wireless operators, Phillips and Bride, were now receiving the order to send out the CQD distress call, an early precursor to SOS. This was the first official acknowledgement of grave danger being communicated to the outside world. Yet, even as these urgent signals crackled across the airwaves, the illusion of safety persisted for many on board. It was a macabre dance between the unfolding reality below deck and the lingering disbelief above. The crew's demeanour, initially calm and reassuring, began to show signs of strain. While they maintained composure, the hurried footsteps, the hushed conversations, and the increasingly frequent appearance of officers on decks usually reserved for passengers all subtly signalled that something was indeed very wrong. Yet they continued to follow orders, keeping the initial alarm to a minimum, ensuring that passengers were moved slowly and methodically, not panicked. This was a testament to their training and discipline, even as the walls of their magnificent ship began to close in. The pervasive confusion and dismissal were a terrible initial handicap. Precious minutes, perhaps even half an hour, were lost in this state of collective disbelief. Minutes that, for a ship with insufficient lifeboats and a rapidly flooding hull, were literally the difference between life and death. The silent, almost gentle impact had masked a mortal wound, allowing the illusion of invincibility to hold sway just long enough to seal the fate of thousands. The ship continued to blaze with lights, a deceptive beacon of safety, even as the dark, frigid waters silently claimed her from within. As the initial confusion gave way to the undeniable truth, the atmosphere aboard the Titanic transitioned from a deceptive calm to a growing sense of unease, then to a creeping realization of profound danger. The subtle tremors and dismissed noises became impossible to ignore as the ship began to show tangible signs of its mortal wound. This was the terrifying dawn of understanding, when the unsinkable myth shattered, and the chilling reality of evacuation began to unfold. Captain Smith, having received Thomas Andrews' grim prognosis that the ship had, at best, a couple of hours left, understood the desperate urgency. The order was given, prepare the lifeboats. This command, delivered to his bewildered officers, was the first official step towards a desperate last-ditch effort to save lives. Below decks, the engineering staff, led by Chief Engineer Joseph Bell, were engaged in a truly heroic yet ultimately futile battle. They remained at their posts, in the suffocating heat and encroaching icy water of the engine rooms, striving to keep the lights and pumps running for as long as humanly possible. Their selflessness provided invaluable time for the evacuation to begin, allowing the ship to remain illuminated and stable enough for hundreds to make it to the boat deck. A mainstream historical fact is that not a single one of the 35 engineers survived. They all went down with the ship, exemplifying extraordinary dedication to duty. On the boat deck, the crew began the arduous task of uncovering and swinging out the lifeboats. These were not the sleek modern lifeboats we envision today. They were heavy, wooden vessels designed for utility, not ease of deployment. The davits, the mechanisms used to lower them, were stiff and unpracticed. Many crew members had never participated in a full lifeboat drill. This lack of practical training immediately became apparent. There was fumbling, hesitation, and a general air of inexperience as the sailors struggled with ropes and winches. A quirky tidbit is that the paint on the davits was still fresh and sticky from the ship's maiden voyage, adding to the difficulty of their operation. You can imagine the frustration, perhaps a curse muttered under one's breath, as a gloved hand slipped on the newly painted metal. Blast it all! This blooming paint! Meanwhile, the subtle list of the ship began to become more noticeable. A slight tilt to port, then a more pronounced lean to the bow, as the forward compartments continued to fill with water. This developing angle, however slight at first, was a terrifying visual cue for those beginning to suspect the worst. The water was slowly, inexorably, winning its battle against the steel and rivets. Below decks, the evidence was even more undeniable. Water began to rise through stairwells and flood lower corridors, particularly in third class, which was located closer to the bow and had fewer, more confined exits. Passengers in these sections were the first to encounter the icy reality, their initial disbelief replaced by growing fear as water seeped under their cabin doors or lapped at their feet in the communal areas. The realization of danger spread unevenly across the ship. For the first-class passengers insulated by luxury and the initial reassurances, it was a gradual dawning. Stewards were now going door to door, advising passengers to dress warmly and put on their life belts, often still insisting it was merely a precaution, just in case. Some passengers, unwilling to believe the scale of the threat, scoffed at the idea, perhaps refusing to leave their comfortable cabins. Imagine a wealthy socialite halfway through her beauty routine being told to put on a crude canvas life belt. A life belt? Really, dear? Is this entirely necessary? I simply cannot be seen in such a ghastly contraption. For third-class passengers, the situation was more immediate and terrifying. Their cabins, closer to the source of the flooding, were often the first to be affected by the rising water. The labyrinthine corridors, separate stairwells and locked gates, ostensibly for health inspections at Ellis Island, now became obstacles to escape. There was less formal communication from the crew. Instead, the sound of rushing water, the sight of flooded passageways, and the sheer volume of frightened people trying to find their way up to the boat deck became their grim instructors. Historians still argue whether the physical barriers and the general delay in communicating the severity of the situation to third-class passengers directly contributed to their disproportionately high casualty rate. It's a bitter question of social hierarchy meeting survival instinct. As passengers emerged onto the boat deck, they were met by a chaotic but still somewhat orderly scene. The ship remained brilliantly lit, a deceptive beacon against the inky blackness. The band, having moved to the deck, played lively ragtime tunes, a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding disaster. This was a deliberate attempt to maintain morale and prevent panic, a desperate effort to create an illusion of normalcy. Imagine the eerie dissonance, a jaunty tune playing while crew members grimly swung out lifeboats designed for only a fraction of the people on board. It was a macabre, unsettling juxtaposition. Captain Smith, with Chief Officer Wilde and First Officer Murdoch, oversaw the loading of the lifeboats. The command, women and children first, was given, a protocol of the era, but one that would prove agonizingly difficult to enforce. There was confusion, arguments, and desperate pleas as families were torn apart. Many men, seeing their wives and children off, held on to the hope that another boat would come, or that the ship would simply not sink. This hope, fostered by the ship's reputation, was a cruel deceiver. The first lifeboat, Lifeboat 7 on the starboard side, was lowered at approximately 12:45 a.m. It was tragically underfilled, carrying only 28 people despite a capacity for 65. The crew, wary of breaking the davits or tearing the ropes, were overly cautious, not yet realizing the true depth of the catastrophe unfolding. This became a recurring and heartbreaking pattern in the early stages of the evacuation. You can almost hear the nervous instructions from the officers, "Slowly now, steady as she goes," while precious minutes and even more precious lives slipped away. The sight of the first boats being lowered, small wooden shells against the immense steel hull, must have been a chilling spectacle for those still on board. It was the undeniable proof that the ship was, indeed, going down. The initial casual curiosity had given way to genuine fear, then to a creeping dread. The air, already biting cold, now carried the unspoken chill of mortality. The lights of the ship, once a comfort, now seemed to mock their impending doom, illuminating the desperate reality with a stark, unforgiving brilliance. The band played on, a defiant melody against the gathering storm, as the massive ship slowly, inexorably, began its final doomed descent into the frigid depths. As the full gravity of the Titanic's fate became undeniably clear, the orderly, albeit hesitant, preparations on the boat deck quickly descended into a desperate struggle, defined by the agonizing protocol of women and children first. This command, ingrained in maritime tradition, became a crucible for human behaviour, igniting acts of profound self-sacrifice alongside moments of heartbreaking desperation. The scene on the boat deck was a chaotic tableau of humanity confronting its end. Lifeboats, designed to hold 65 passengers, were being lowered with tragically few occupants. The officers, particularly First Officer Murdoch on the starboard side and Second Officer Lightoller on the port side, were under immense pressure, making split-second decisions with inadequate information and unprecedented stakes. Murdoch, often allowing men onto his boats if no women or children were present, aimed for maximum capacity where possible. Lightoller, a strict adherent to the women and children only rule for lowering, sometimes allowed boats to descend with even fewer people, rather than risk having men aboard. This subtle difference in interpretation led to inconsistencies that would later be debated endlessly. A mainstream historical fact is that this strict adherence, particularly by Lightoller, contributed significantly to the fact that many lifeboats left the Titanic less than half full. The cries of women and children first echoed across the deck, sometimes met with confusion, sometimes with immediate compliance, and sometimes with outright refusal. Wives clung to their husbands, refusing to be separated, preferring to face death together. Mothers frantically searched for their children amidst the milling crowds. Young children, bewildered and frightened, were sometimes physically separated from their fathers and placed into the boats by force. The emotional toll of these separations was immense, a silent agony playing out against the backdrop of the ship's continued listing. Imagine a desperate father, his face etched with unspeakable pain, pressing a final kiss to his child's forehead before handing them over to a stranger in a lifeboat, knowing it might be their last embrace. The social dynamics of class played a chillingly decisive role in this desperate evacuation. First-class women, often with their maids or governesses, were generally guided quickly and efficiently to the lifeboats, their privileged status offering them priority. The spaciousness of their decks and the attentiveness of the crew meant easier access. In contrast, the third-class passengers, many of whom were still struggling to find their way through the labyrinthine lower decks as water relentlessly rose, faced significant obstacles. The distance to the boat deck was longer, the routes more confusing, and the communication less direct. By the time many third-class women and children reached the upper decks, many of the forward lifeboats had already been lowered. Historians still argue whether the physical segregation of third-class passengers, combined with delays in opening access gates, effectively condemned many of them. Was it a deliberate act, or merely the grim consequence of the ship's design and the social norms of the era? The sound of the band continued to play, a surreal and increasingly haunting soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Led by Wallace Hartley, the musicians bravely played lively ragtime tunes, then hymns, in a desperate attempt to maintain calm and order. The juxtaposition of their cheerful melodies against the backdrop of a sinking ship, the shouts of officers, and the creak of davits, was profoundly unsettling. It was an act of extraordinary courage and dedication, a final attempt to provide comfort and dignity in the face of absolute despair. A quirky tidbit is that Hartley carried his violin with him, even to his death. His body was later recovered, and the violin was found strapped to his chest in its leather case. As more boats were lowered, the ship's list became more pronounced, making it increasingly difficult to walk steadily on deck. The forward section of the ship began to dip noticeably, and the ocean, once a distant horizon, seemed to creep closer to the deck rails. For those still on board, the sight was terrifying. The lights, powered by the incredible dedication of the engineers below, continued to shine brightly, illuminating the scene with an almost theatrical brilliance, emphasizing the stark reality of their predicament. Moments of heroism and self-sacrifice abounded. John Jacob Astor IV, after ensuring his young pregnant wife Madeline was safely in a lifeboat, stood calmly on deck, reportedly telling a second-class passenger, "The sea is calm and the ship is safe." He then perished with the ship. Benjamin Guggenheim, a wealthy mining magnate reportedly dressed in his finest evening wear, declaring, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." He and his valet were last seen sitting quietly in the A-deck grand staircase area. These were acts of quiet defiance, of choosing dignity in the face of inevitable death. But there were also moments of desperation and panic. As the limited number of lifeboats became painfully clear, some men attempted to rush the boats, only to be turned back by officers, sometimes at gunpoint. The instinct for survival, raw and primal, asserted itself. The sight of women and children being prioritised, while necessary for the time, was an agonising reality for the men who stood by, knowing their chances of survival dwindled with each departing boat. A father might have pleaded, a desperate guttural sound, to join his family, only to be gently but firmly pushed back. The wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, continued their desperate work sending out distress calls. They switched from CQD to the newer SOS, a symbol that would forever be associated with the Titanic's final moments. They transmitted until the very last second, when the power supply finally failed, heroically staying at their post even as water began to creep into their cabin. Their frantic messages, picked up by distant ships like the Carpathia, were the only lifeline to rescue, a fragile thread connecting the doomed vessel to the possibility of salvation. The freezing cold of the night, previously a discomfort, now became a deadly threat. Passengers not adequately dressed shivered uncontrollably, their bodies already beginning to lose vital warmth. The air itself seemed to crackle with an unspoken terror, an icy premonition of the fate that awaited those who would soon enter the frigid waters. The launching of each successive lifeboat, whether full or half empty, marked a tiny victory for those aboard, but an increasing sense of doom for those left behind. The ship, once an emblem of human triumph, was now a sinking monument to human hubris, its grand silhouette beginning to tilt irrevocably against the vast, indifferent canvas of the North Atlantic. The sounds of the band, increasingly faint, provided a haunting lullaby to a world teetering on the brink of oblivion. As the Titanic settled deeper into the frigid grasp of the Atlantic, the ship's list became undeniably pronounced, a terrifying visual confirmation of her impending demise. The once level decks now sloped steeply towards the bow, making walking an increasingly precarious dance, particularly for those unaccustomed to the ship's movements. Panic, once suppressed by the band's defiant melodies and the officers' calm commands, began to ripple through the remaining crowds on the boat deck and below. This was the moment where heroism and desperation converged, illuminating the raw, primal instincts of survival in stark contrast to the veneer of Edwardian civility. On the boat deck, the loading of the remaining lifeboats intensified, though the process remained fraught with difficulty and heartbreaking choices. Officers, their faces grim, continued to enforce the women and children first dictum, even as the urgency grew to fill every available space. Lifeboat D, the last collapsible boat to be launched from the portside, was nearly rushed by desperate men, but Second Officer Lightoller, drawing his pistol, prevented them, emphasising the women and children only rule with a grim resolve. This boat, meant for 47, left with around 25, a testament to the chaotic and inefficient loading process, even in the direst moments. A mainstream historical fact is that if all lifeboats had been filled to capacity, an additional 500 to 600 lives could have been saved. This chilling statistic underscores the profound impact of the women and children first rule, the lack of effective drills, and the overarching belief that the ship would remain afloat longer. Below decks, the scene was even more chaotic for those who had yet to reach the upper levels. The grand staircase, once a symbol of opulence and grandeur, was now a funnel for rising fear. Water began to creep up its lower flights, reflecting the dazzling chandeliers in a macabre dance of light and shadow. The elegant A-deck promenade, enclosed by its glass screen, became a temporary refuge for some, but the rising water below was pushing air pressure upwards, causing explosions of air and debris in the lower levels. The sound of bursting rivets, groaning steel, and the chilling roar of water filled the air, replacing the comforting hum of the engines. In third class, the desperation was most acute. Many passengers, particularly those who spoke little English, struggled to understand instructions or navigate the ship's complex layout. The separate stairwells, designed for segregation, now served as barriers to escape. As water invaded their communal spaces and cabins, the remaining third-class passengers surged upwards, often in disoriented groups seeking any path to the open air. There were accounts of men attempting to break down locked gates or find alternative routes, their voices filled with anguish and terror. One can imagine a mother clutching her children, her eyes wide with terror as she frantically searches for a way through the labyrinthine corridors, guided only by the distant sounds of voices and the desperate instinct to survive. Amidst the growing chaos, acts of profound heroism and self-sacrifice continued to unfold. Captain Smith, a man of quiet dignity, was observed roaming the deck, issuing commands and encouraging his crew, a picture of resolve in the face of inevitable doom. He reportedly told his officers, "Well, boys, do your best for the women and children and look out for yourselves." The band, led by Wallace Hartley, played on, their music morphing from jaunty ragtime to solemn hymns, reportedly ending with the hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee." This act of musical defiance against overwhelming terror became one of the most poignant symbols of the tragedy, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for courage and dignity in the face of oblivion. A quirky tidbit is that there is still a debate among historians as to which version of Nearer My God to Thee, English or American, was played, but the sentiment of a final, comforting melody remains powerful. The courage of the crew was remarkable. Stewardesses assisted women and children into lifeboats, often sacrificing their own chances of survival. Firemen and engineers, as previously noted, remained below, sacrificing themselves to keep the lights and power running, ensuring that the ship remained illuminated and operational for as long as possible. Their sacrifice was paramount to the success, however limited, of the evacuation. These unsung heroes, often forgotten in the grand narrative, truly epitomise the phrase, "duty unto death." Yet desperation also manifested in darker ways. Some men, realising the slim odds, fought for places in the lifeboats, leading to confrontations with officers. There were instances of threats, and even shots fired, though reports vary on the specifics. The instinct for self-preservation, raw and unvarnished, emerged in the face of absolute terror. It's a stark reminder that even in the most civilized settings, under extreme duress, the veneer of societal norms can crack. Historians still argue whether the initial underfilling of lifeboats led to greater panic later on, as those left behind realised the scale of the shortfall. This initial error, born of caution and inexperience, compounded the tragedy. As the forward deck submerged further, the ship's list to port became severe. Water began pouring into the forward grand staircase, a chilling cascade that quickly transformed the iconic symbol of luxury into a watery abyss. Passengers near the front of the ship found themselves standing on steeply angled decks, the icy seawater rushing towards them. The sound of explosions as bulkheads collapsed under immense pressure and air escaped from trapped compartments added to the terrifying symphony of destruction. The sky above remained clear and star-filled, a cruel mirror to the unfolding disaster. The stars, so distant and indifferent, witnessed the silent, agonizing descent of the unsinkable vessel. The ship's lights, though flickering occasionally, remarkably remained on, providing an eerie illumination to the final moments. This prolonged period of light provided a measure of comfort, but also a stark visibility to the horror for those in the lifeboats, watching their floating city slowly vanish into the depths. The realization that they were watching thousands of souls go down with the ship must have been an unbearable burden. The remaining passengers, crowded on the aft end of the tilting deck, realized their time was running out. There were no more lifeboats. The ship was dying. The cold, previously a mere discomfort, now became a chilling precursor to the hypothermia that awaited those who would soon be plunged into the 28-degree Fahrenheit water. The air, filled with the shouts of officers, the creak of steel, and the increasingly desperate cries of those left behind, carried an unbearable weight of impending doom. The Titanic, a symbol of human aspiration, was about to become a monument to human frailty, its magnificent structure now bending and breaking under the indifferent force of the ocean. The final moments of the Titanic, as the grand ship began its irrevocable plunge, were a terrifying ballet of structural collapse and human desperation. For those still clinging to her decks, the world tilted violently, transforming familiar pathways into treacherous slopes. The lights, which had so heroically held, began to flicker with increasing frequency, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the doomed. This was the raw, brutal end of an illusion, as the ocean claimed its prize. As the ship's bow plunged deeper, The stern began to rise ever higher out of the water, revealing the immense, previously unseen propellers now hanging starkly against the star-filled sky. The angle became so steep that walking was impossible. Passengers were forced to clamber on hands and knees, grasping at railings and anything offering purchase. The sound was horrifying. The internal structure of the ship groaned and shrieked under the immense unnatural stresses. Bulkheads designed to withstand lateral pressure buckled under the vertical strain, their rivets popping like gunshots. The tearing, ripping sound of steel, a visceral scream of metal under unimaginable duress, filled the night. The grand staircase, now completely submerged in the forward section, became a watery vortex pulling furniture, debris and unfortunate souls into its depths. The elegant dome above it imploded, a final dramatic gasp as the ocean consumed the ship's most iconic interior. Water, having breached the B-deck level, now rushed freely through the luxurious first-class corridors, turning staterooms into watery tombs. Imagine the beautiful furnishings, the polished wood, the velvet curtains, all being churned and ripped apart by the relentless force of the sea. On the boat deck, the scene was utter chaos. With all the lifeboats gone or having floated off the rapidly sinking bow, hundreds of people were left stranded, their faces etched with a profound, unutterable terror. Some huddled together, resigned to their fate, whispering final prayers or embraces. Others frantically searched for anything that might float, anything that might offer a momentary reprieve from the icy embrace of the ocean. The railings, once a comforting boundary, now became a desperate last hold. Men, previously restrained by the women children first rule, now faced the grim realization that there was no more help coming. A mainstream historical fact is that the Titanic's final list to starboard, which developed in the last minutes, made it even harder for those near the port side to maintain their footing. The courage of the ship's officers and crew in these final moments was extraordinary. Captain Smith, having ensured the last boat was away, was seen returning to the bridge, perhaps in a final act of devotion to his ship, or to meet his fate with dignity. Thomas Andrews, the designer, was last seen in the first-class smoking room, staring at a painting, seemingly resigned. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell and his engineering staff remained in the engine rooms, keeping the lights on until the very last second, their sacrifice providing crucial illumination for the evacuation. Their dedication to duty, even unto death, is a testament to the highest ideals of maritime service. You certainly wouldn't last 10 minutes down there, my friend, not with the rising water and the knowledge of imminent doom. The musicians, Wallace Hartley and his band, provided the most enduring image of final heroism. They had moved from the lounge to the deck, playing until the very end. While there's a debate about the exact final hymn they played, whether it was Nearer My God to Thee or another hymn like Autumn, their unwavering commitment to calming the terrified passengers is undisputed. Their music, a fragile melody against the thunderous symphony of the dying ship, was a final act of grace, a defiant whisper of beauty in the face of horror. A quirky tidbit, perhaps apocryphal, is that a band member reportedly joked, "Gentlemen, I bid you farewell," as the deck grew too steep to stand, maintaining a dark humour until the end. As the stern rose higher, the ship's structure could no longer bear the immense strain. There was a tremendous roar, often described by survivors as a deafening rumble, as the Titanic began to break apart. The most widely accepted theory, confirmed by later wreck site analysis, is that the ship split between the third and fourth funnels, just forward of the grand staircase. The forward section, now completely swamped, pulled downwards with immense force, while the stern section, still buoyant due to trapped air, rose almost vertically into the sky. This was the moment of ultimate structural failure, the final agonizing rending of steel and wood. For those clinging to the stern, their situation was unimaginable. They were now on a colossal platform rising at an almost 90-degree angle, hundreds of feet above the freezing water. People scrambled, fell, and slid down the rapidly tilting deck, tumbling into the abyss. The sound of human screams, a truly horrific chorus, filled the air, mingling with the groaning of the ship. Some tried to climb the railings, desperate to avoid the inevitable plunge. Historians still argue whether the ship truly broke in two before disappearing beneath the waves, or if it was a more gradual separation. Wreckage evidence now strongly supports the two-piece breakup, but survivor accounts varied widely due to the chaos and trauma of the moment. This academic debate, however, does little to diminish the sheer terror of witnessing such a colossal structure tear itself apart. Then, with a final, heart-wrenching roar, the bow section separated from the stern, plunging rapidly into the depths, dragging with it hundreds of souls still trapped within, or clinging to its structure. The stern, momentarily relieved of the bow's immense weight, settled slightly, before slowly, majestically, rearing up again, its immense silhouette silhouetted against the stars, a final, defiant farewell to the surface world. For a few agonizing minutes the stern remained upright, a giant, solitary monument pointing to the heavens, its remaining light still flickering like dying embers. People were clinging to anything they could. Railings, davits, the very structure of the ship itself. Then, with a slow, agonizing groan, it too began its final descent, sliding vertically into the ocean, dragging a powerful vortex of water and air with it. The suction was immense, pulling down anything and anyone nearby. The final sound was a colossal gurgle as the last air escaped from the ship's immense lungs. Then, silence. An oppressive, horrifying silence, broken only by the distant cries of those in the water and the gentle lapping of waves against the lifeboats. The Titanic, the unsinkable marvel, was gone. Just 2 hours and 40 minutes after striking the iceberg, she had vanished, leaving behind a field of debris, a few scattered lifeboats, and thousands of souls plunged into the icy grip of the North Atlantic. The chill in the air was now the chill of death, a palpable presence on the vast, indifferent ocean. From the relative safety of the lifeboats, a harrowing new chapter of the Titanic tragedy unfolded. The ordeal of witnessing the ship's final plunge and grappling with the immediate aftermath. For those adrift on the dark, frigid waters of the North Atlantic, the terror was not over. It had merely shifted, evolving from the immediate threat of a sinking ship to the agonizing reality of mass death and the chilling prospect of their own survival. As the Titanic's stern rose majestically, then slid silently into the depths, a profound and terrible silence descended upon the ocean. It was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the wooden hulls of the lifeboats, and, terrifyingly, the wails and screams of hundreds of people in the water. These were the sounds of those who had gone down with the ship, or who had been flung from the decks as it broke apart. The cries were not uniform. Some were piercing shrieks of terror, others choked pleas, still others the desperate gurgling sounds of drowning. It was a chorus of unimaginable agony, a sound that would forever haunt the memories of the survivors. Imagine being in a small boat, rocking gently, surrounded by the vast, indifferent ocean, and hearing such a cacophony of suffering. It would be enough to shatter the strongest constitution. You certainly wouldn't last 10 minutes, not with that sound echoing in your ears, knowing you could do nothing to help. The occupants of the lifeboats faced an immediate agonizing dilemma. Do they go back and try to rescue those in the water, or do they remain safe, knowing that attempting a rescue might swamp their already crowded boats, or endanger those already saved? Most of the lifeboats filled with women and children kept their distance. The fear of being swamped by desperate, freezing swimmers was immense and immediate. They had been given strict orders by the officers to pull away from the sinking ship to avoid being pulled down by the suction, and this fear now extended to the thrashing bodies in the water. Only a handful of lifeboats made attempts at rescue. Lifeboat number 4, under the command of Quartermaster Perkis, rowed back towards the scene of the sinking about 20 minutes after the ship went down. They managed to pull 5 people from the water, 2 of whom later died. Another notable effort came from lifeboat number 14, commanded by 5th Officer Lowe. After the ship disappeared, Lowe waited for the cries to diminish. Then, with incredible foresight, he transferred passengers from his partially full boat to other boats, creating space. He then gathered 5 crew members and rowed back into the debris field. This was a truly heroic act, the only lifeboat to actively return to the scene of the disaster to attempt a large-scale rescue. They pulled 4 men from the water, one of whom later died. A mainstream historical fact is that despite the thousands in the water, only a tiny fraction were pulled out alive by the lifeboats, illustrating the brutal reality of the situation and the overwhelming odds against survival in the icy Atlantic. The scene in the water was one of unspeakable horror. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of people were struggling, gasping for breath in water that was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees below freezing point. At this temperature, the human body can survive for only a matter of minutes. Hypothermia sets in rapidly, numbing the limbs, clouding the mind, and eventually causing the heart to stop. Many perished from cardiac arrest almost immediately upon hitting the water, a quick and brutal death. Others, their lungs burning from the cold, drowned. The cries eventually began to fade one by one as the brutal cold claimed its victims. Within 20 to 30 minutes, the vast chorus of screams had diminished to a chilling silence, punctuated only by isolated, desperate moans. The debris field around the sinking site was vast, strewn with wreckage from the ship, deck chairs, pieces of panelling, lifebelts, and the bodies of the dead. Some survivors managed to cling to floating debris, a desperate, fleeting hope in the face of the overwhelming cold. The collapsible lifeboat B, which had been washed off the deck upside down, became a refuge for about 30 men, including Second Officer Lightoller and wireless operator Harold Bride. They clung precariously to its upturned keel, exposed to the elements, desperately trying to balance the unstable raft. It was a testament to sheer willpower and luck that they survived the night. A quirky tidbit is that Lightoller, despite his earlier strictness about women and children only, ended up on the overturned boat, directing the men to maintain balance by shifting their weight, essentially becoming a human counterweight system. For those in the upright lifeboats, the emotional toll of witnessing the carnage was immense. They were survivors, but their survival was haunted by the knowledge of those they had left behind. They huddled together for warmth, listening to the fading cries, their faces pale in the dim starlight. The immediate terror of the sinking had passed, replaced by a profound and overwhelming grief, a collective trauma. There was often little conversation. The shock was too great, the grief too raw. Historians still argue whether a more aggressive approach to rescue by the lifeboats, ignoring the fear of swamping, could have saved significantly more lives. While the officers' caution was understandable given the circumstances and their training, it remains a bitter point of contention, highlighting the what-if that plagues the tragedy's legacy. It's a question that explores the boundary between protocol and extraordinary moral courage. The vastness of the ocean, previously a source of wonder, now became a symbol of overwhelming indifference. The clear, star-studded sky, which had seemed so benign just hours before, now bore witness to an unparalleled human catastrophe. The silence that followed the cessation of cries was perhaps the most haunting sound of all, a deafening testament to the thousands of lives that had just been extinguished. As the hours dragged on, the physical conditions in the lifeboats became increasingly harsh. The cold was relentless, seeping into bones, causing shivering that became uncontrollable. Many occupants were underdressed, having rushed from their cabins in their nightclothes or light evening wear. Hypothermia began to set in among the survivors, even those out of the water. Dehydration, fear, and exposure gnawed at their resolve. Children cried softly, their mothers attempting to comfort them with numb fingers. The air itself seemed to crackle with the remnants of terror and grief. The search for other ships began, a desperate scanning of the horizon for any sign of lights. The thought of rescue, however distant, was the only thing that kept hope alive for many. The sheer isolation of their predicament, adrift in the vast, empty ocean, was almost as terrifying as the sinking itself. The lifeboats, once symbols of safety, now felt like tiny, fragile specks in an infinite expanse, at the mercy of the elements. The rising sun, still hours away, promised little warmth, only the cold, stark light of a new day that would reveal the full extent of the horror. The water beneath them, holding the silent secrets of the dead, continued its rhythmic lapping, a grim lullaby to the survivors. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky on April 15th, the grim tableau of the Titanic disaster slowly emerged from the inky blackness. For the survivors huddled in the lifeboats, the night had been an eternity of cold, terror, and the horrifying symphony of dying screams. Now, the rising light offered little comfort, only the stark, undeniable evidence of the catastrophe. The debris field that spread across the ocean surface was the most immediate and horrifying sight. It stretched for miles, a grim tapestry of human belongings and ship wreckage, wooden deck chairs, splintered fragments of bulkheads, personal effects, and, most chillingly, hundreds of frozen bodies, bobbing lifelessly in the frigid water. Many were still wearing their lifebelts, a cruel testament to their last, futile attempt at survival. Their faces, contorted in the agonies of hypothermia or drowned, stared blankly at the indifferent sky. The sight was indescribably shocking, a visceral confirmation of the enormous loss of life. Imagine the collective gasp, the suppressed sobs, as those in the lifeboats finally saw the full, horrifying scale of the tragedy under the unforgiving light of dawn. The lifeboats themselves became small, isolated islands of humanity, each grappling with its own internal dynamics and the overwhelming reality of their situation. The larger boats, carrying women and children, often maintained a disciplined silence, broken only by the shivering of the cold and the soft murmurs of comfort. Babies cried, children whimpered, and the adults, many in a state of shock, simply stared at the horizon, waiting. The air was thick with the scent of salt water, fear, and the profound chill of exposure. You certainly wouldn't last 10 minutes out there, not with that biting cold and the sight of so much death. One of the most precarious situations was aboard collapsible Lifeboat B, which remained upside down. Second Officer Lightoller, along with about 30 men including wireless operator Harold Bride, clung desperately to its keel, their bodies partially submerged in the freezing water whenever a wave washed over them. Their sheer willpower kept them alive, despite the desperate cold and the constant threat of slipping into the ocean. They spotted a large piece of floating debris, later identified as part of the Titanic's forward deckhouse, and managed to transfer to it, gaining a more stable, albeit still exposed, platform. Their struggle for balance, shifting weight with every swell, was a testament to the raw human instinct for survival. A quirky tidbit, perhaps a darkly humorous one, is that they had to constantly kick their legs to warm their numb feet, turning their struggle into a macabre, involuntary dance. The search for rescue now became the paramount concern. The distress calls sent by Phillips and Bride had been heard, most notably by the RMS Carpathia, a Cunard liner under the command of Captain Arthur Rostron. The Carpathia was 58 miles away from the Titanic's last known position, and upon receiving the urgent SOS, Rostron immediately ordered his ship to race towards the sinking site at top speed, pushing his engines to their absolute limit, even risking navigation through reported ice fields. This act of extraordinary seamanship, diverting from his original course and risking his own ship, would forever define Captain Rostron's legacy. A mainstream historical fact is that the Carpathia's engines were pushed so hard that Rostron reportedly had the ship's heating turned off to maximise steam for propulsion, making the journey equally uncomfortable for his own passengers. As the sun slowly rose higher, painting the clouds with hues of orange and pink, the lifeboats began to try and group together, offering a small measure of collective security. The officers in charge of the boats, though exhausted, maintained their leadership, attempting to count survivors and assess their dwindling supplies. The water in the balers, previously used to scoop out leakage, was now sometimes eyed with desperate thirst, despite its icy temperature. Historians still argue whether the lack of preparedness for cold weather survival gear in the lifeboats, beyond the rudimentary blankets and water barrels, many of which were also lost or damaged, significantly reduced the chances of survival for those rescued later. The focus had been on buoyancy, not on prolonged exposure to extreme cold. This oversight highlights a gap in the understanding of maritime rescue in the early 20th century. The psychological impact on the survivors was immense. Many were in a state of profound shock, unable to comprehend the scale of what they had just witnessed. Others were overcome with grief, having lost loved ones in the sinking. The silence, broken only by the sound of the sea and the occasional sob, was heavier than any storm. The faces of the survivors, visible in the pale light of dawn, were etched with a mixture of terror, exhaustion, and an overwhelming sense of loss. As the hours dragged on, the mirage of other ships began to play tricks on weary eyes. Faint lights on the horizon would sometimes appear, only to vanish, leading to agonizing moments of false hope. The officers used signal lamps and flares, desperately trying to catch the attention of any passing vessel. The air grew slightly warmer as the sun climbed, but the chilling memory of the night and the sight of the dead prevented any true comfort. Then, around 4 a.m, a distinct light appeared on the horizon. Not a phantom, but a real, growing beacon. It was the Carpathia. The sight of her masthead light, then her funnels, growing larger and more distinct with every passing minute, sent a wave of relief, then a surge of desperate hope through the occupants of the lifeboats. Weak cheers erupted, tears flowed, and the profound tension that had held them captive for hours finally began to break. The journey of the Carpathia had been arduous, racing through a treacherous ice field, but her diligence and the courage of her crew had paid off. The slow, painstaking process of transferring survivors from the small lifeboats to the massive liner began. Ropes were lowered, ladders were thrown over the side, and the exhausted, numb survivors were carefully helped aboard. For many, the simple act of climbing aboard the Carpathia, feeling solid deck beneath their feet, was an overwhelming moment, a rebirth. They were wrapped in blankets, given hot drinks, and attended to by the Carpathia's crew and passengers, who had given up their own cabins and comforts. The deck of the Carpathia became a makeshift infirmary, a quiet space for tears and shared disbelief. The journey from death to life was complete, but the scars of that night would remain, etched deep into their souls, a testament to the night the unsinkable went down. The very air around the Carpathia, previously filled with the scent of salt and coal, was now heavy with the smell of wet wool, medicine, and the profound, lingering aroma of grief. For those who found themselves plunged into the icy depths of the North Atlantic after the Titanic's final plunge, the struggle for survival was brutally short and agonizingly futile. This was the ultimate crucible, where the body's resilience met the unforgiving power of extreme cold, leading to a swift and brutal end for the vast majority. The approximately 1,500 souls who entered the water faced not just drowning, but the more insidious and rapid killer, hypothermia. You wouldn't last 10 minutes. The water temperature was a staggering 28 degrees Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius. This is 4 degrees below the freezing point of fresh water, possible because of the salt content. Upon entering water this cold, the human body undergoes a rapid and violent shock response. The first reaction is an involuntary gasp reflex, often leading to immediate aspiration of water, causing instant drowning. Even if one managed to suppress this reflex, the shock alone would trigger hyperventilation, dizziness, and disorientation. Imagine the sudden, overwhelming sensation of ice water closing around you, stealing your breath, burning your skin with a cold so intense it felt like fire. Within 2 to 3 minutes, the exposed skin would become numb, and the fine motor skills would rapidly deteriorate. Fingers would lose their ability to grasp, making it impossible to hold on to floating debris, or to don a life belt effectively if it hadn't already been secured. The cold would penetrate deeper, reaching muscles and vital organs. Shivering, initially violent and uncontrollable, would give way to a grim stillness as the body's core temperature plummeted. The heart would begin to beat erratically, struggling to pump blood through constricted vessels. A mainstream historical fact is that experts estimate the time of useful consciousness in 28-degree water to be as little as 10 to 15 minutes, meaning the ability to perform any deliberate action quickly vanished. The cries that emanated from the water immediately after the sinking were a cacophony of sheer terror and primal agony. Survivors in the lifeboats described the sound as an overwhelming roar, a continuous, horrifying lament. But within 20 to 30 minutes, that chorus began to fade. The screams diminished, one by one, replaced by isolated moans, then a terrifying silence, broken only by the lapping of waves against debris. This rapid cessation of noise was the most chilling testament to the swift and brutal efficiency of the cold. The ocean, which had just swallowed a magnificent ship, now silently claimed its human cargo. Many victims succumbed to cardiac arrest as their hearts simply could not withstand the sudden extreme thermal shock. Others, weakened by the cold and unable to stay afloat, eventually drowned. The lifebelts, while providing buoyancy, did little to protect against the cold, and often served only to keep bodies floating after life had departed. A particularly grim sight for the morning light. Among the debris, some individuals managed to find floating objects, pieces of wreckage, deck chairs, or overturned collapsible boats. The most famous example was collapsible lifeboat B, which floated upside down, offering a precarious refuge. Second Officer Lightoller and wireless operator Harold Bride were among approximately 30 men who clung desperately to its keel, half submerged in the icy water with every passing swell. Their survival was a testament to sheer luck, fortitude, and the leadership of Lightoller, who instructed them to continually shift their weight to keep the boat from capsizing completely. A quirky tidbit is that the men on Collapsible B, in their desperate struggle to balance, sometimes had to stand for hours, their feet submerged, their bodies stiffening with the cold, a bizarre dance of survival on a floating tomb. The psychological torment for those in the water was as profound as the physical. Imagine being fully conscious, knowing that death was moments away, feeling your body betray you, losing the ability to move, to speak, to call for help. The realization that no lifeboats were returning, that the warmth and safety of the ship were gone forever, must have been an unbearable burden. For some, the decision to give up came quickly, a desperate surrender to the inevitable. For others, a fierce, primal will to live kept them fighting against the encroaching numbness until their last breath. Historians still argue whether the class of the victim influenced their chances of survival in the water. While first-class men were often better dressed in warmer clothing, providing a slight temporary advantage, the sheer brutality of the water temperature rendered such differences largely negligible over time. The cold was an indiscriminate killer. The debate often centres on access to lifebelts and immediate assistance from those nearby, rather than intrinsic physical differences once submerged. The sheer volume of frozen bodies that morning was overwhelming. When the Carpathia arrived, her crew and the survivors in the lifeboats were confronted with a vast, silent graveyard. Rescuers often found clusters of bodies, individuals who had huddled together for warmth in their final moments. The sight was so traumatizing that many of the Carpathia's crew and passengers would carry the images with them for the rest of their lives. It was not just a scene of death, but of immense, profound loss, multiplied by hundreds. The Carpathia's crew made efforts to recover bodies, but their priority was saving the living. Some bodies were brought aboard for identification and burial at sea, while others were left to the vast indifference of the ocean. The grim tally was a stark reminder of the missing. Of the 2,208 people on board, only 706 survived. Over 1,500 lives were lost, the vast majority succumbing to the icy embrace of the North Atlantic. The impact of the cold continued even after rescue for some. Many who were pulled from the water, even if they had not perished, suffered from severe hypothermia, frostbite, and shock. Some died shortly after being brought aboard the Carpathia, their bodies too weakened by the ordeal to recover. The experience of extreme cold continued to exact its toll, even in the warmth of rescue. The lingering effects of that exposure, the numb extremities, the deep internal chill, would remain with survivors for days, weeks, or even months, a physical manifestation of their brush with death. The ocean, once a symbol of adventure and possibility, was now a vast, cold tomb. The stars above, which had shone so brightly on the Titanic's final hours, now witnessed the silent aftermath, the floating remnants of a dream shattered by ice and human miscalculation. The wind, which had barely stirred the waters, now seemed to whisper the names of the lost, a mournful dirge across the endless expanse. The air itself, though warming with the rising sun, still carried the ghost of the deep, biting cold, a silent testament to the thousands who had met their end in its unforgiving embrace. As the first light of dawn broke over the frigid North Atlantic, painting the grim scene in hues of grey and pale yellow, the distant beacon of hope materialized on the horizon, the RMS Carpathia. Her arrival, pushing through the ice field at maximum speed, marked the beginning of the end of the survivors' terrifying ordeal, transitioning from the raw struggle for survival to the profound emotional and physical aftermath of rescue. Captain Arthur Rostron, a man of quiet determination, had driven his ship relentlessly through the night. Upon reaching the coordinates provided by the Titanic's last desperate SOS, he found himself amidst a vast, silent field of icebergs and debris, punctuated by the scattered lifeboats. The sight must have been overwhelming. The sheer number of icebergs, the floating wreckage, and the chilling realization of the scale of the disaster. His priority was clear: bring the living aboard. A mainstream historical fact is that the Carpathia, despite being designed for a much warmer route, was remarkably well suited for rescue, possessing large gangway doors and ample deck space, which proved invaluable in bringing survivors aboard quickly. The process of bringing the survivors aboard the Carpathia was slow, arduous, and fraught with emotion. The Carpathia's crew, aided by her own passengers, worked tirelessly, lowering ropes, ladders, and bosun's chairs to pull the exhausted hypothermic survivors from the lifeboats. For many, the simple act of climbing the rope ladders, their muscles stiff with cold and fear, was a supreme effort. Hands, numb and almost useless, struggled to grasp the lines. Children, wrapped in blankets, were often hoisted up in bags, carefully cradled by the crew. Imagine the relief, the overwhelming surge of emotion, as a survivor's trembling hand finally gripped a strong, warm hand reaching down from the safety of the Carpathia's deck. As each survivor stepped onto the Carpathia's deck, they were immediately enveloped in blankets, offered hot coffee or brandy, and directed to the ship's saloons and cabins, which had been quickly converted into makeshift infirmaries. The Carpathia's passengers, alerted to the disaster, had voluntarily given up their cabins, their blankets, and their food, demonstrating an extraordinary outpouring of human kindness and compassion. Doctors and nurses aboard the Carpathia worked tirelessly, attending to frostbite, shock, and the psychological trauma. The deck became a silent, solemn reunion ground for those who found loved ones, and a place of quiet, agonizing despair for those who did not. The overturned collapsible lifeboat B, with Second Officer Lightoller and Harold Bride clinging to it, presented a particular challenge. It was too heavy to lift onto the deck with its occupants. Instead, the Carpathia nudged the collapsible alongside a gangway, allowing the weary men to scramble aboard after their harrowing night. Their faces, gaunt and etched with exhaustion, spoke volumes of their ordeal. A quirky tidbit is that when Harold Bride, the wireless operator, was brought aboard, he immediately resumed assisting the Carpathia's wireless operator, despite his severe frostbite, highlighting his incredible dedication even in distress. He was so cold, apparently, that he simply sat down at the operating key and instinctively began sending messages, his fingers working even when his mind was still reeling. The emotional landscape on the Carpathia was a complex tapestry of overwhelming relief, profound grief, and a palpable sense of shared trauma. Survivors often huddled together, sometimes strangers, finding comfort in shared silence or whispered stories. Tears flowed freely, not just from those who had lost loved ones, but from the sheer relief of survival and the chilling realization of how close they had come to death. The sight of so many widows, so many fatherless children, painted a stark picture of the human cost. Historians still argue whether the initial shock and the immediate need for survival suppressed the symptoms of what we now call PTSD, which would only manifest years later for many survivors. The long-term psychological impact was immense and often overlooked in the immediate aftermath. As the lifeboats were emptied, they were often hoisted aboard the Carpathia. The last lifeboat to reach the Carpathia was lifeboat number 12, arriving around 8:30 a.m. Among its occupants was a small child who was found to have no surviving family aboard. This moment, replicated in various forms, became a symbol of the profound loss endured. The Carpathia then lingered for a few more hours, slowly cruising the debris field, but no more survivors were found. The silence of the ocean, previously filled with desperate cries, was now absolute. The decision was made to turn for New York, leaving the dead to the sea, a heart-wrenching necessity. The voyage to New York on the Carpathia was a somber one. The ship, usually bound for the Mediterranean, was now a vessel of grief and salvation. Her own passengers, many having given up their own comforts, continued to assist the survivors, providing clothing, food, and emotional support. The wireless room, now under the charge of the Carpathia's operator and the indomitable Harold Bride, became a frantic hub, relaying lists of survivors and the grim news of the Titanic's loss to a stunned world. News of the disaster began to spread globally, sending shockwaves through every continent. The arrival in New York City on April 18th was an unprecedented event. Thousands gathered on the docks, peering through the rain, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. The sight of the Carpathia, flying her flags at half-mast, signalled the tragic outcome. As the survivors disembarked, they were met by anxious relatives, reporters clamouring for stories, and a public hungry for answers. The images of these haggard, traumatised survivors, many still wrapped in borrowed blankets, became iconic, forever etched into the collective memory. The aftermath of the Titanic disaster was immediate and far-reaching. Public inquiries were launched in both the United States and Great Britain, scrutinising every aspect of the voyage, from the number of lifeboats to the wireless protocols and the quality of the ship's materials. These investigations led to significant reforms in maritime safety regulations, including mandatory lifeboat space for all on board, 24-hour wireless watch, and the establishment of the International Ice Patrol. The tragedy, born of hubris and a series of devastating oversights, ultimately spurred critical advancements in safety. The memory of the Titanic would forever serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of human endeavour in the face of nature's might, and a testament to the unforeseen consequences of overconfidence. For the survivors, the journey continued, but it was forever altered. They carried not just the physical scars of exposure, but the deep, invisible wounds of loss, guilt, and the profound trauma of witnessing the impossible. Their lives, having been spared, became living testaments to the night the unsinkable went down, a night that redefined maritime safety and etched itself permanently into the annals of history. The chilling cold of that April night, the silent plunge of the grand vessel, and the desperate cries of those lost would echo through generations, a haunting reminder that even the greatest human triumphs are ultimately at the mercy of the indifferent ocean. As the last echoes of that fateful night fade and the grand ship finds its eternal rest beneath the frigid waves, we too can ease back into the quiet of our own beds. The story of the Titanic is one of human ambition and devastating humility, a stark reminder that even our most magnificent creations are but whispers against the vastness of nature. Let the images of opulence and terror, courage and despair gently recede. The ocean keeps its secrets, and the stars continue their silent watch. Find comfort in the stillness around you, in the warmth of your covers, and let the sounds of your world lull you into a peaceful slumber. The journey is over,